What's up, guys? Welcome to Muse Fanfiction. We've got something special today. What if Harry audited the Potter-Black-Peverell vaults at age 7 and found Dumbledore had stolen Hogwarts' founding artifacts? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, Blood and Gold. The cupboard smelled like dust and old shoes and something that might have been mouse droppings, and Harry Potter had stopped caring about any of it roughly 2 years ago. You could get used to anything if you had to. That was the first real lesson of his life, learned well before reading or arithmetic or any of the other things Aunt Petunia grudgingly let him absorb from the fringes of Dudley's education. He pressed his back against the wall beneath the stairs and listened to the floorboards creak overhead. Uncle Vernon was pacing. That was never good. The pacing meant something had gone wrong at Grunnings, a drill order lost, a client unhappy, some microscopic disruption to Vernon Dursley's conception of how the universe should operate, and when the universe disappointed Vernon, he went looking for something smaller to take it out on. Harry pulled his knees to his chest. He was 7 years old, and he was very small for 7, and he had learned that being small and quiet was the closest thing to a superpower he possessed. The pacing stopped. Harry held his breath. Boy! The lock on the cupboard rattled, and the door swung open, and Vernon's face appeared, purple-red and swollen with the particular fury he reserved for days when Harry existed too visibly. Petunia tells me you were staring at the rose bushes again. Harry blinked. I was weeding them. She told me to, don't you lie to me. Vernon's hand closed around Harry's arm and hauled him out into the hallway. Harry's shoulder socket screamed. He'd learned not to. Mrs. Henderson saw you. Just standing there. Muttering. And the roses, she says they grew 3 inches in an afternoon. You think that's normal? I didn't. What have I told you? Vernon shook him. Harry's glasses slipped sideways on his nose. What is the one rule in this house? Harry knew the answer. Don't be a freak. Don't do anything strange. Don't remind them that he was the unwanted remainder of a car crash and 2 drunks who'd had the poor grace to leave their son on a doorstep. I wasn't doing anything, Harry said, and he meant it, because he never tried to make strange things happen. They just did. The roses had looked so dry and brown and sad, and he'd felt sorry for them while he was pulling weeds, and then they'd started stretching toward the sun like they'd just remembered what it was for. Vernon hit him. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't even particularly hard by Vernon's standards, an open-handed smack across the side of the head that set Harry's ear ringing and knocked his glasses to the floor. What was different this time was the follow-through. Vernon grabbed him by the collar of Dudley's old shirt and slammed him into the wall beside the cupboard door, and Harry's skull bounced off the plaster, and something behind his eyes went white. You will not do freakish things in my house, each word punctuated by another slam, and Harry couldn't see properly, and there was something warm running down the back of his neck, and he thought in a distant, disconnected way that this was probably worse than usual, and then something happened. It started in his chest. Not pain, he had plenty of that already, but something else. A heat. A pressure. Like a fist clenching around his heart, except the fist was made of light, and it was his, and it was angry in a way that Harry had never allowed himself to be because angry got you hit and hit got you hurt and hurt got you nothing but more of the same. But the anger was there now, and it wasn't asking his permission. Vernon's hand was still on his collar. Harry looked up at him through cracked glasses and a haze of blood from where his scalp had split, and he said, very quietly, "Let go of me." Vernon did not let go of him. The windows blew out. Every window on the ground floor of number 4, Privet Drive, the kitchen window and the sitting room windows and the little frosted panel in the front door, all of them detonated outward simultaneously, spraying glass across the lawn and the driveway and Mrs. Henderson's prize hydrangeas. The light bulbs in the hallway burst. The television in the sitting room shrieked and died. And Vernon Dursley was lifted off his feet and thrown backward down the hall like a man hit by a lorry, crashing through the kitchen door and into the table, which collapsed under him with a sound like the world's least dignified drum solo. Harry slid down the wall and sat on the floor. His ears were ringing. His head was bleeding. The heat in his chest was still there, pulsing like a second heartbeat, and the air around him was doing something strange, shimmering, almost, the way air shimmered over hot tarmac in summer. Petunia appeared at the top of the stairs, took one look at the glass and the blood and Vernon groaning in the wreckage of the kitchen, and screamed. Harry closed his eyes. He was so tired. The shimmering air grew brighter, and somewhere far below the earth, in a cavern deep beneath London where the bones of dragons lined the walls and rivers of ancient gold ran through channels carved before the Romans came, something woke up. Griphook was having a bad century. This was not, in itself, unusual. Goblins lived long lives and held long grudges, and the 20th century had offered plenty of material for both. The wars alone, one Dark Lord, then another, humans slaughtering each other with such theatrical enthusiasm while the goblin nation watched from behind the marble counters of Gringotts and calculated the profit margins on grief. Bad for some accounts. Good for others. War was reliable that way. But tonight, sitting in his office 7 levels below the main floor, Griphook was dealing with something that offended him more than war, more than human stupidity, more than the ongoing insult of the Wand Ban of 1631. Paperwork. Specifically, the quarterly reconciliation of dormant vaults, which was a task roughly as enjoyable as chewing granite and twice as tedious. Vault after vault, gold in, gold out, interest accrued, fees deducted, the endless mechanical heartbeat of wealth doing what wealth did when no one was watching it. He was halfway through the Potter vault when the quill stopped moving. Griphook stared at the ledger. He removed his pince-nez, cleaned them on his waistcoat, replaced them, and stared again. The numbers were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not the kind of rounding error that a less meticulous goblin might overlook. The Potter vault, Vault 687, was showing a discrepancy of 11,000 galleons over the last 6 years. Withdrawals. Regular, modest, carefully spaced withdrawals, each one just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic alert. Griphook's lip curled back from his teeth. Someone was stealing from the vault. Someone who knew exactly how Gringotts alert systems worked. Someone with a key. He pulled the authorization records. The withdrawals had been made by proxy, never in person, always through a certified representative acting under a magical guardianship document. The guardian's name was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Griphook set down his quill with the careful precision of someone resisting the urge to snap it in half. He reached for the Black family ledger. 20 minutes later, he reached for the Peverell ledger. 40 minutes after that, he was standing in front of Director Ragnarok's desk, and the expression on his face would have made a dragon reconsider its life choices. "How much?" Ragnarok said. The director of Gringotts was old even by goblin standards, his face a topographic map of centuries of deals and battles and the particular grinding patience required to manage the finances of a civilization that considered goblins barely sentient. Gold first, or artifacts? Ragnarok's eyes narrowed. Both. Gold, approximately 47,000 galleons across the 3 vaults over a period of 6 years. Artifacts, Griphook placed a list on the desk. It was long. Including items from the Potter family vault, the Black family vault, and the Peverell vault. Director, some of these items are not family property. They are Hogwarts legacy pieces. The Sword of Gryffindor. Hufflepuff's cup. Slytherin's locket. Ravenclaw's diadem. Ragnarok was silent for a very long time. The Founder's artifacts, he said at last. Stored in the Peverell vault by agreement with Gringotts in 1487. Held in trust for Hogwarts and its rightful heirs. Removed, according to the access logs, by Albus Dumbledore under the authority of a guardianship claim over the Potter heir. The Potter child. Harry James Potter. Age 7. Placed with Muggle relatives by Dumbledore after the deaths of James and Lily Potter. No record of any interaction with the magical world since. No record of any goblin-approved guardianship filing. The document Dumbledore presented was, Griphook paused, and his teeth showed again. A human document. Ministry issued. Not ratified by the Goblin Nation. Ragnarok stood. He was not tall, no goblin was, but when the director of Gringotts stood, you felt it in the stones beneath your feet. He used a ministry paper to access a goblin-held vault. Yes. And my predecessors allowed this. Griphook said nothing. The previous director had been, to use the politest available term, flexible in his interpretation of protocol where Albus Dumbledore was concerned. Dumbledore had that effect on people. He smiled, and he twinkled, and he invoked the greater good, and somehow you found yourself agreeing to things that would have made you spit iron filings under any other circumstances. Assemble a retrieval team, Ragnarok said. Full guard. Ward breakers. A healer, in case the child is, he stopped. In case. We're going to the Muggle residence. We are going to collect our client. And then we are going to audit every last Canute. Ragnarok's smile was a thing that belonged in a nightmare. Dumbledore wants to play banker. Let's see how he enjoys being on the other side of the counter. The goblins arrived at Privet Drive at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, which was not an hour that Little Whinging was accustomed to visitors. There were 6 of them. Griphook led the group, dressed in Gringotts formal blacks with the bank's crest, a dragon clutching a gemstone, worked in silver thread on his breast. Behind him came 2 warrior guards in goblin-forged armor that seemed to drink the streetlight, a wardbreaker named Bogrod whose fingers crackled with contained energy, a healer called Silvertongue, and, bringing up the rear with an expression of barely concealed fury, Director Ragnarok himself. They marched up the front path of number 4 in formation. Griphook noted the broken windows, the glass still scattered on the lawn, the faint shimmer of residual magic in the air that made his skin prickle. Raw accidental magic. Powerful. He knocked on the door. No one answered. He knocked again, harder. A light came on upstairs. Footsteps. The door opened a crack, and Petunia Dursley's horse-like face appeared, pale and pinched and already forming the word no before she'd even seen what she was saying it to. Then she saw them, and the word died on her lips. Mrs. Dursley, Griphook said. We are here for Harry Potter. There's no one here by, Mrs. Dursley. Griphook's voice didn't change in volume, but it changed in quality, the way a knife changes quality when you turn it so the edge catches the light. We know he is here. We know what happened tonight. We know about the broken windows and the burst of accidental magic, and we know, although this is secondary to our purpose, that the child has been harmed. You may let us in, or we may let ourselves in. I assure you, you will prefer the first option. Petunia's mouth worked soundlessly. Behind her, Vernon appeared at the top of the stairs, one arm cradled against his chest where he'd landed on it. Who the bloody hell, Mr. Dursley, Ragnarok said, stepping forward, and there was something in the old goblin's voice that made Vernon stop talking immediately, the way a rabbit stops moving when it smells a fox. We represent Gringotts Wizarding Bank. We are here on a matter of inheritance law. Impede us, and you will be dealing with something considerably less pleasant than a visit. The Dursleys let them in. Harry was in the cupboard. Silvertongue found him there, curled on a thin mattress that was barely more than a folded blanket, dried blood matting the hair on the back of his head, one arm wrapped around his knees. He was awake. His eyes, green, startlingly green, luminous in the wandlight, tracked the healer's movements with the wary alertness of a feral cat. Mr. Potter, Silvertongue said, crouching. She was small even for a goblin, with clever hands and a voice like stones smoothed by water. My name is Silvertongue. I am a healer. I am not going to hurt you. Harry stared at her. He had never seen a goblin before. He had never seen anyone who looked like they'd walked out of the fairy tales, and Petunia had never read him. Are you real? He asked. Something flickered across Silvertongue's face, there and gone, a hairline crack in professional composure. Quite real, Mr. Potter. May I look at your head? He considered this with a gravity that no 7-year-old should have needed and then nodded, once. While Silvertongue worked, her fingers glowing faintly as she sealed the split in his scalp and checked for deeper damage, her expression growing stonier with each old scar and badly healed bone she catalogued, Griphook and Ragnarok dealt with the Dursleys. This did not go well for the Dursleys. You were given custody of this child, Ragnarok said. They were in the sitting room. Vernon had wedged himself into his favorite armchair like a man trying to merge with the upholstery. Petunia sat on the sofa with her hands in her lap, vibrating with the particular species of terror that came from having your deepest secret, that the world of freaks and monsters was real and it was standing in your living room, confirmed by 6 armed goblins. You were given a stipend for his care. 300 galleons per month, drawn from the Potter vault. Converted to Muggle currency, this amounts to approximately £1,500. Vernon's face went through several colors. We never, Petunia started. The deposits were made into a Muggle bank account registered to Petunia Dursley née Evans, Griphook said, reading from a ledger. Beginning November 1981. Continuing to the present date. Total disbursed, approximately £108,000 sterling. Silence. £108,000, Ragnarok repeated, pleasantly. For a child sleeping in a cupboard. In clothes that do not fit. With a medical history that my healer is currently documenting and which, I suspect, will make for deeply unpleasant reading. He leaned forward. Where did the money go, Mrs. Dursley? Harry, standing in the hallway with Silvertongue's hand on his shoulder, watched Aunt Petunia's face collapse. He watched Uncle Vernon's mouth open and close like a landed fish. And he felt something, not satisfaction, not yet, because he didn't fully understand what was happening, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the ground shifting under his feet, the first tremor of a world rearranging itself. We should go, Mr. Potter, Silvertongue said gently. Go where? To the bank. There are things you need to know. Harry looked at the cupboard. He looked at the little mattress and the broken toy soldiers he'd salvaged from Dudley's second bedroom and the single woolen blanket that smelled like dust. Okay, he said. He didn't look back. Gringotts at midnight was not the same Gringotts that witches and wizards saw during banking hours. The marble was the same, and the chandeliers, and the long counters with their scales and quills. But the goblins moved differently when the humans were gone. Faster. Sharper. The politeness, the performance of politeness, thin as gold leaf and twice as fragile, fell away, and what was left was something older and more honest. A nation conducting its business. Harry sat in a chair that was slightly too large for him in Ragnarok's private office, 7 stories below the surface. His head didn't hurt anymore. The healer had fixed that, and the bruise on his arm, and the rib that had apparently been cracked for 3 weeks without anyone noticing, and she'd done it all with quiet fury barely contained behind professional calm. He'd been given a cup of something hot and sweet that was not tea and not chocolate but something in between, and he drank it because he was cold and because refusing things that were offered to him had never been a survival strategy that worked at the Dursleys. Ragnarok sat across from him. Griphook stood behind the director's chair, holding a stack of ledgers. Mr. Potter, Ragnarok said. Do you know what you are? A freak, Harry said, without inflection. It was a fact, not a feeling. The sky was blue. Water was wet. Harry Potter was a freak. Ragnarok's expression did something complicated. You are a wizard, Mr. Potter. More specifically, you are the last living heir of 3 ancient and noble houses, the House of Potter, the House of Black, and the House of Peverell. Do you know what that means? Harry shook his head. It means, Ragnarok said, that you are one of the wealthiest individuals in the magical world. It also means that someone has been stealing from you for 6 years. And we are going to get every last piece of it back. Harry processed this. It didn't fit anywhere in the architecture of his understanding. He was a boy who slept in a cupboard. He didn't have things. Things were for Dudley. Who stole from me? He asked, because that part, at least, made a kind of sense. People took things from Harry. That was how the world worked. A man named Albus Dumbledore, Griphook said. He is the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He is also the man who placed you with the Dursleys. Harry took another sip of his drink. And he took my money. Your money. And more than money. Griphook set a ledger on the desk and opened it. We need to perform what's called an inheritance test, Mr. Potter. It will confirm your bloodlines and establish your legal claim to the vaults. It requires a drop of your blood on a charmed parchment. It will not hurt. Things that people say won't hurt usually do. Griphook looked at Harry with something that was not pity. Goblins didn't do pity, but was perhaps its first cousin. This one genuinely won't. Harry held out his hand. Griphook produced a needle of goblin silver, no larger than a sewing pin, and pricked the tip of Harry's index finger. A single drop of blood fell onto a sheet of parchment that looked older than the table it sat on. The blood moved. Harry watched, forgetting to breathe, as the red drop slid across the parchment like a living thing, splitting and branching and writing. Lines of text bloomed in dark crimson, names and dates and connections spreading across the page like roots seeking water. When it was done, the parchment looked like this: Harry James Potter, born July 31st, 1980, son of James Fleamont Potter and Lily Marie Potter née Evans, heir by blood to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, Vault 687, Trust, Vault 712, Family, heir by blood and godfather designation to the most ancient and noble house of Black, Vault 711, heir by blood to the most ancient and most noble house of Peverell, Vault 3, Founding Vault, Magical Guardian, Current, Unauthorized Albus Percival. Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Magical Guardian, designated by parents will Sirius or in Black. Active magical bindings, 1, Core restriction, placed November 1, 1981. Active tracking charms, 3, active compulsions, none detected. Harry looked up. What does core restriction mean? Ragnarok and Griphook exchanged a look. It means, Ragnarok said carefully, that someone has placed a binding on your magical core. A limiter. It restricts the amount of magic you can access. Someone put a leash on my magic. Yes. Can you take it off? Yes. Do it. Ragnarok leaned back. Mr. Potter, removing a core binding can be intense. The magic it's been holding back will be released all at once. For an adult wizard, this would be uncomfortable. For a child your age, with a core as large as yours appears to be, do it. There was something in the boy's voice. Ragnarok had lived for centuries. He had negotiated with kings and dark lords and the kind of people who made both look like amateurs. He knew what authority sounded like when it wasn't performing, when it wasn't bluster or bravado but the simple, unshakable expression of a will that would not be moved. This 7-year-old child, sitting in a too-large chair with a cup of goblin cocoa and blood on his parchment, had it. Silver tongue, Ragnarok said. The healer stepped forward. She looked at Harry for a long moment, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, between two beings who knew what it was like to be underestimated. Hold still, Mr. Potter. This will feel like waking up. She placed her hands on either side of his head. Her fingers glowed, not the gentle glow of healing this time, but something brighter, hotter, a white gold light that pulsed in time with Harry's heartbeat. She spoke 3 words in gobbledygook that sounded like stones cracking, and Harry screamed. Not in pain. In release. Like a door that had been locked for 6 years blowing off its hinges. Magic poured out of him, visible for an instant as a wave of emerald light that shattered the glass on Ragnarok's desk and sent every paper in the room airborne. The stone floor cracked. The chandeliers swung. 7 levels above, in the main hall, every scale in Gringotts chimed simultaneously, a crystalline chorus that made every goblin in the building stop what they were doing and look up. Then it was over. Harry sat in his chair, breathing hard. The air around him hummed. His eyes, already green, seemed to glow faintly, like sunlight through leaves. "Oh," he said softly. "That's what it's supposed to feel like." Ragnock was gripping the arms of his chair. One of the warrior guards had drawn a blade on instinct. Griphook's ledgers were scattered across the floor. "The binding," Silvertongue reported, her voice admirably steady, "has been removed. As has the magical signature embedded within it. It was placed by Albus Dumbledore." "Of course it was," Harry said, and there was something new in his voice now. Not just the authority that Ragnock had heard before, but the sharp edge that authority grew when it was backed by power and aimed by anger. "What else did he take from me?" Griphook gathered his ledgers. His hands were steady, goblin professionalism ran deeper than surprise, and he opened the first one to a bookmarked page. "Let us begin with the gold," he said. The accounting took 3 hours. Harry listened to all of it. He didn't fidget. He didn't yawn. He sat in his chair and he drank his cocoa and he listened as Griphook laid out 6 years of methodical theft. The withdrawals from the trust vault, small, regular, invisible. The larger withdrawals from the family vault, disguised as maintenance fees for properties Harry didn't know he owned. The transfers from the Black Vault, authorized under a guardianship claim that the goblins had never ratified. 47,000 galleons. In a world where a family could live comfortably on 500 a year. "Now the artifacts," Harry said, when the gold accounting was finished. His voice was flat. Griphook opened a different ledger. The Potter family vault contains several hundred items of historical and magical significance. Of these, the following are confirmed missing. He read the list. It was long. Enchanted mirrors and charmed weapons and books that had been in the Potter family for centuries. A set of dueling robes that had belonged to Charles Potter. A ring that had belonged to Harry's grandmother. James Potter's own wand, his spare wand, a Potter family tradition, which should have been waiting for Harry when he came of age. Harry's jaw tightened with each item, but he didn't speak. "The Black Vault," Griphook continued. "The losses here are more selective. Dumbledore appears to have taken only the items with significant magical power." Another list. Another litany of things that belonged to Harry and had been taken by a man Harry had never met. "And the Peverell Vault," Griphook said, and something in his tone changed. "This is where it becomes complicated." "Complicated how?" "The Peverell Vault is one of the oldest in Gringotts. It predates the bank itself. The vault was here before we built the rest, carved into the bedrock by the Peverell brothers themselves, or so the histories say. It contains, or contained, items of extraordinary power. Among them, for artifacts that were placed in goblin custody in 1487 under a binding trust agreement." "What artifacts?" Griphook set down his ledger. Even his professional detachment had limits, and they had been reached. "The 4 founders' artifacts of Hogwarts School. The sword of Godric Gryffindor. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff. The locket of Salazar Slytherin. The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw." The room was very quiet. "Dumbledore took them," Harry said. "Dumbledore took them. Under the authority of your guardianship. From a vault that the Goblin Nation has held in trust for over 500 years. Harry set down his cup. He looked at Ragnock. "These are important, aren't they? Not just to me. They are the 4 most significant magical artifacts in Britain," Ragnock said. "They were created by the 4 founders of Hogwarts. They are, by rights, the property of the school and its heirs, which, through the Peverell and Potter lines, includes you. Their removal from Gringotts is not merely theft from your family. It is a violation of the oldest treaty between the Goblin Nation and Wizarding Britain." Harry was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was calm, and his green eyes were steady, and Ragnock thought, not for the first time that night, that this child was going to be either the salvation or the destruction of magical Britain, and quite possibly both. "I want them back," Harry said. "All of it. The gold. The artifacts. Everything. That is why we brought you here. And Dumbledore. Harry's hands curled on the arms of his chair. The wood groaned under his grip, not from physical strength, but from the magic that now flowed through him unhindered, responsive to his emotions, eager to answer his call. What happens to Dumbledore? Ragnarok showed his teeth. It was the expression that, in goblin culture, preceded either a very good deal or a very bad war. That, Mr. Potter, depends entirely on how thoroughly you wish to ruin him. They took him to the vaults. The cart ride would have terrified most children. It terrified most adults. Gringotts' underground railway was not built for human comfort, it was built for speed and security, and it plunged through the earth at angles that defied geometry, past caverns of stalactites and underground lakes of black water and the distant, rumbling warmth of dragons sleeping in the deep. Harry loved it. He leaned over the edge of the cart with the wind in his hair and the torchlight strobing across his face, and for the first time in his memory, he laughed. It was a rough sound, unpracticed, like a machine running for the first time in years, but it was real. Griphook, sitting behind him, said nothing. But he noted it. The Potter Trust vault came first. Vault 687. A mountain of gold galleons, silver sickles, bronze nuts, diminished by Dumbledore's withdrawals but still enormous by any normal standard. Harry stared at it. This is the small one, he said. The Trust Vault. Established for your day-to-day expenses. The family vault is considerably larger. Harry picked up a galleon. Turned it over. Set it down. My parents left me this. Your father's family has been wealthy for centuries. Your mother was, well. She married into it. And Dumbledore used it to pay my relatives to beat me. Griphook said nothing, because there was nothing to say. They went deeper. Vault 712, the Potter family vault, was behind a door that required blood and magic to open. It was vast. Not just gold here, but shelves and cases and racks of things. Weapons. Books. Jewelry. Portraits that moved and whispered as the torchlight touched them. Harry, one of the portraits said, a woman with glasses and fierce eyes. Oh, Merlin. You look just like James. I'm Doria. I'm your grandmother. Where have you been? Harry stood in front of the portrait for a long moment. Then he said, in a cupboard, and moved on, because if he stayed he would cry, and he was not ready to cry in front of anyone. The Potter grimoire was on a pedestal in the center of the vault. A book bound in leather so old it was almost black, clasped with silver, humming with a magic that Harry could feel in his teeth. He reached for it, and it opened for him, the clasp releasing, the pages fanning, the book practically leaping into his hands. It's keyed to Potter blood, Griphook said, something like respect in his voice. No one else could have opened it. Harry looked at the first page. The handwriting was archaic but legible, and the words seemed to rearrange themselves as he read, becoming clearer, simpler, as if the book was adjusting to its reader. To our heir, this is the record of our family's magic. Not spells, any fool can learn spells. This is the theory beneath the theory. The why of magic. Read it, understand it, and no wand waver in the world will be your equal. He closed the book and held it against his chest. I'm keeping this. It is yours, Mr. Potter. The Black Vault was next, Vault 711, behind a door carved with serpents and guarded by curses that Griphook dismantled with practiced ease. Inside, it was darker, more dangerous, the kind of wealth that had teeth. Dark artifacts sat alongside goblin-wrought jewelry and stacks of gold that had a slightly greenish tint. The Black family, Griphook said, had eclectic tastes. I can see that. Harry was looking at a cabinet full of things that pulsed with unfriendly magic. Should I be worried about any of this? Worried? No. You're the heir. The protections recognize you. Anyone else who walked in here uninvited would be dead before they took 3 steps. Finally, the Peverell Vault. Vault 3. The cart descended for a long, long time. Past the dragon caverns. Past the underground river that Griphook said led to the sea. Past layers of rock that were old when the dinosaurs were young. The air grew warm, then hot, then warm again in a way that felt alive, like the breath of something enormous. The door was not a door. It was a wall of solid stone with 3 symbols carved into its face, a line, a circle, and a triangle. They glowed faintly as Harry approached. The symbol of the Deathly Hallows, Griphook murmured. The sign of the Peverells. Harry pressed his hand to the stone. The symbols flared bright, and the wall dissolved like mist, and beyond it was, empty shelves. Harry walked in slowly. The vault was enormous, cathedral-sized, the ceiling lost in darkness. Pedestals and cases and display stands filled the space, each one labeled, each one crafted with the kind of care that spoke of irreplaceable contents. Almost all of them were bare. Harry stopped in front of a pedestal marked with a small brass plaque, the sword of Godric Gryffindor. Forged in goblin fire, enchanted by the founder. Property of Hogwarts and its heirs in perpetuity. The pedestal was empty. He moved to the next, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. Empty. The locket of Salazar Slytherin. Empty. The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. Empty. 4 pedestals. 4 missing artifacts. 1,000 years of magical heritage, stolen by one man with a guardianship form and a smile. Harry stood in the center of the empty vault, and the magic inside him stirred. Not the explosive, desperate burst of privet drive. Something deeper. Something that came from the stone itself, from the vault and the bedrock and the ancient power of the Peverell line recognizing its heir and mourning what had been taken. The air hummed. The pedestals vibrated. And Harry felt something click into place inside him, a connection to this place, to this legacy, to the long chain of blood and magic that led from the 3 brothers of legend to the small, scarred boy standing in their empty vault. Director Ragnarok, Harry said, and his voice carried in the vast space like a bell. Mr. Potter. You said this depends on how thoroughly I want to ruin Dumbledore. I did. Harry turned. The glow in his eyes was brighter now, steady, like banked coals. I want it thorough. I want it legal. I want it done in a way that he can't talk his way out of with a smile and a speech about the greater good. I want the gold back, I want the artifacts back, and I want the magical world to know exactly what their great hero did to a child in a cupboard. Ragnarok studied him. You understand that Albus Dumbledore is the most politically powerful wizard in Britain. He holds 3 offices, Headmaster, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump. He has allies in every corner of the government. Taking him on openly, is exactly what I'm going to do. Will require more than anger. It will require strategy, patience, allies of your own, and the kind of legal and political campaign that can take years. I'm 7, Harry said. I've got nothing but time. A long pause. Griphook, Ragnarok said. Director. Begin the formal audit. Every vault. Every transaction. Every document Dumbledore has ever submitted to this bank. I want a case so airtight that even the Wizengamot couldn't ignore it if they tried, and they will try. Yes, Director. And contact our solicitors. All of them. All 12 firms. All 12. Ragnarok looked at Harry. The boy looked back, and in that moment they were not a goblin and a wizard, not an adult and a child, not 2 species with 1,000 years of mutual distrust between them. They were 2 beings who had been stolen from, and who intended to do something about it. Welcome to Gringotts, Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Ragnarok said. Let's begin. Far away, in a tower room at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk and felt one of his silver instruments sputter and go dark. He looked at it. It was the monitor tied to Harry Potter's blood wards, the device that tracked the boy's location, his health, his magical output. It had been spinning steadily for 6 years, reassuring Dumbledore that his most important chess piece was exactly where it needed to be, safe, contained, humble, and unaware. Now it was dead. Dumbledore reached for it, tapped it with his wand. Nothing. He cast 3 diagnostic spells in rapid succession. The instrument was not broken. The connection had been severed. Someone had removed the tracking charms. He stood. Fawkes, the phoenix on his perch, ruffled his feathers and let out a low, uncertain trill. "It's nothing, my friend," Dumbledore said, but his eyes, those famous twinkling eyes, were not twinkling. "I'm sure it's nothing." He crossed to his window and looked out over the Hogwarts grounds. The lake was still. The forbidden forest was a dark line against the sky. Everything was peaceful. Dumbledore's hand, resting on the windowsill, was trembling. He had plans. Careful, meticulous, decades-long plans. Plans that depended on Harry Potter being a specific kind of boy, grateful, eager to please, ignorant of his heritage, desperate for the guidance of a kind old man who would steer him gently toward his destiny. Toward the sacrifice that destiny required. And now the monitors were dark. "Fawkes," Dumbledore said quietly. "Where is the boy?" The phoenix said nothing. But he turned his head away, and in the firelight, his dark eyes held something that might have been judgment. Dumbledore returned to his desk. He opened a drawer and removed a folded piece of parchment, the guardianship document, the one that gave him legal authority over Harry Potter, the one that had opened vault doors and silenced questions for 6 years. He looked at it for a long time. Then he began to write letters. Harry slept that night in a room in Gringotts that had never been intended for human use but had been hastily adapted with a bed, clean sheets, and a warming charm that took the chill off the underground stone. It was small and plain and it had no windows. It was the most comfortable place he had ever slept in his life. He lay on his back with the Potter grimoire on his chest, feeling the hum of its magic through the leather, and he stared at the ceiling and tried to organize the tidal wave of information that the last several hours had dumped on him. He was a wizard. He was rich. He was the heir to 3 ancient families. A man named Dumbledore had stolen from him, bound his magic, and left him with people who locked him in a cupboard and fed him scraps. The 4 most important magical artifacts in Britain were missing, and finding them was now, apparently, his problem. And somewhere out there, the person who had killed his parents was not as dead as everyone thought. Ragnarok had mentioned this almost in passing. There are reasons Dumbledore may have taken the artifacts that go beyond greed, and we will discuss them when you are ready, and Harry had filed it away, because he could feel the shape of something enormous lurking behind that careful phrasing, and he wasn't ready to look at it directly yet. He was 7 years old. He closed his eyes. The magic hummed in his chest, free now, unbound, stretching and settling into spaces it had been locked out of for 6 years. He could feel the stone around him. He could feel the gold in the vaults below. He could feel the faint, distant pulse of the wards that protected Gringotts, layer upon layer of goblin magic laid down over centuries. He could feel the empty pedestals in the Peverell vault, like missing teeth, like phantom limbs. The artifacts had been there so long that the vault remembered them, ached for them. And through his blood connection to the vault, Harry ached too. "I'm going to get them back," he thought. "I'm going to get all of it back. And then I'm going to find out exactly why Dumbledore needed them badly enough to steal from a child." He opened the grimoire. The first chapter was titled On the Nature of Magic, and it began, "Magic is not a tool. A wand is a tool. A spell is a tool. Magic is the thing itself, the fabric, the foundation, the living substance of reality. You do not use magic. You negotiate with it. And the first step in any negotiation is understanding what the other party wants." Harry read until the words blurred. Then he slept, deep and dreamless, with his hand on the book and his magic curling around him like a dragon around its hoard. In the morning, the work would begin. The audit. The legal campaign. The slow, relentless, goblin-precise process of dismantling everything Albus Dumbledore had built on a foundation of stolen gold and appropriated legacy. Harry was 7 years old. He had a lot to learn. But he was a fast learner. And he was very, very angry. Chapter 2, The Weight of Names. 3 years changed a lot of things. Harry Potter at 10 was not the same creature as Harry Potter at 7. The skinny, flinching boy who'd been pulled from a cupboard under the stairs had been fed, healed, trained, and educated by a species that did not believe in coddling, and the results were, depending on your perspective, either impressive or alarming. He was still small. The years of malnutrition had seen to that, and even Silvertongue's healing could only do so much to reverse the damage of sustained neglect during critical growth years. But the smallness was deceptive now. He moved like someone who had spent 3 years training with goblin war mages, which he had, light on his feet, balanced, aware of his surroundings in the particular way of someone who had been hit enough times to learn that awareness was cheaper than healing. He was sitting in the Gringotts library, 6 stories below ground, reading a 14th-century treatise on ward construction. The Potter grimoire lay open beside him, he was never far from it, and he was cross-referencing its discussion of magical resonance with the ward theory text and finding connections that neither author had intended. This was how Harry learned, not in straight lines but in webs, pulling threads from different sources and braiding them together until something new emerged. "You're mutilating that book's thesis," said Griphook, appearing at the end of the table with a stack of documents and the expression of someone delivering news. "The thesis deserves it. He's wrong about sympathetic anchoring. The grimoire says ward foundations respond to intent before structure, you build the purpose first and let the geometry follow. This idiot's got it backwards." That idiot was the foremost ward crafter of his century. Then his century had low standards. Griphook set down the documents. He had long since stopped being surprised by Harry's capacity for absorbing magical theory. The boy read the way goblins counted gold, obsessively, methodically, with an appetite that bordered on the pathological. 3 years of access to the Potter grimoire, the Black family's restricted library, and Gringotts' own archives had produced something that Griphook had never seen in a human this young, a genuine theoretical understanding of magic as a system, not just a collection of spells. The practical training had been equally aggressive. Goblin war magic was different from wizard combat, rawer, closer, built around blades and wards and short-range devastation rather than the long-distance dueling that human wizards favored. Harry had taken to it naturally. More than naturally. The goblin combat instructors, warriors who had been fighting since before Harry's grandparents were born, had started refusing to spar with him 6 months ago, after he'd put Warclaw through a stone wall without apparent effort. He didn't use a wand. Didn't have one. Didn't need one. The Potter grimoire had been explicit on this point. A wand was a crutch, a focus, a tool for wizards who couldn't negotiate with magic directly. Harry, with his unbound core and his Peverell blood and 3 years of goblin training, could negotiate just fine on his own. "The Wizengamot date is set," Griphook said. Harry looked up from his book. "October 14th. 3 weeks from now. Madam Bones has secured a full session, no closed chambers, no sealed proceedings. Open court. Dumbledore's people tried to block it. Naturally. He had Cornelius Fudge attempt to classify it as a matter of national security. Madam Bones invoked Article 17 of the Wizengamot Charter, the right of any ancient and noble house to demand a public hearing on matters of inheritance fraud. Fudge backed down. Fudge always backs down. That's his entire function. Indeed. Griphook produced a sealed envelope from the stack. This arrived this morning. Delivered by owl to the bank's public address. It's from Dumbledore. Harry took the envelope. Cream-colored parchment, heavy and expensive, sealed with purple wax stamped with a stylized D. He broke the seal and read. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. Harry recognized it as such because he'd spent 3 years studying Dumbledore's methods, not just the financial records and the legal documents, but the man himself, his writings, his speeches, the carefully constructed public image that had made Albus Dumbledore the most trusted figure in wizarding Britain for half a century. The letter expressed concern. It expressed understanding. It acknowledged that mistakes may have been made, and that the situation with your relatives was not what I intended. It offered a meeting, private, informal, just two people talking. It expressed hope that this matter can be resolved without the need for public proceedings that may prove distressing for all involved. It was signed with a flowing hand and closed with the phrase, "I remain, as always, working for the greater good." Harry read it twice. Then he folded it neatly and set it on the table. "He's scared," he said. "You think so?" "He wouldn't be writing if he weren't." 3 years of silence, 3 years of trying to get the Wizengamot to quash the investigation, trying to get the goblins to settle quietly, trying to find out where I am and who's training me, and now, 3 weeks before the hearing, he writes a personal letter. Harry tapped the folded parchment. He's realized he can't stop it. So he's trying to control it instead. Get me alone. Be charming. Convince me that whatever he did it for my own good. Will you meet with him? Absolutely not. Griphook permitted himself a thin smile. I'll draft a response. Don't bother. Let the silence answer. The letter sat on the table, and Harry returned to his books, but his mind was no longer on ward theory. It was on the hearing. 3 weeks. 3 years of preparation coming down to a single day in the Wizengamot chamber. The case was strong. More than strong, it was overwhelming. Griphook and a team of 12 goblin auditors had spent 3 years building it, and the result was a document so detailed, so meticulously sourced, so devastatingly comprehensive that it could have served as a doctoral thesis on institutional corruption. The financial theft was the simplest part. 47,000 galleons, unauthorized withdrawals, fraudulent guardianship documents. The goblins had traced every canute, where it went, what it was spent on, who benefited. A surprising amount had gone to the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's private resistance group from the war. More had gone to Hogwarts itself, routed through discretionary funds that only the headmaster controlled. And some of it, a smaller but significant portion, had gone to individuals. Payments. Stipends. Incentives. Hush money, if you wanted to be uncharitable about it. The artifacts were more complicated. The founder's relics had been tracked through a combination of goblin magic, forensic auditing, and old-fashioned detective work. The Sword of Gryffindor was in Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts. This was not even disputed, since Dumbledore had been displaying it openly for years, claiming it was Hogwarts property held by the headmaster. The cup, the locket, and the diadem were more difficult. The goblins had confirmed that Dumbledore had removed them from the vault, but their current locations were shielded behind layers of protective magic. And then there was the other thing. The thing Ragnarok had hinted at on Harry's first night and had explained in full 6 months later, when Harry was 8 and had demonstrated enough emotional stability to handle it. Horcruxes. Harry had sat in Ragnarok's office and listened to the director explain what Tom Riddle had done, the systematic mutilation of a human soul, the dark rituals, the anchoring of soul fragments in objects of power. And he had understood, with a cold clarity that would have frightened anyone watching, why Dumbledore had taken the Founder's artifacts. Because at least 2 of them, the cup and the locket, were Horcruxes. Containers for pieces of Voldemort's soul. And the third, the diadem, was suspected. This was Dumbledore's defense. Harry knew it. The old man would stand in the Wizengamot and say, I took these objects because they were corrupted by the darkest magic known to wizardkind. I took them to protect the world. Everything I did for the greater good. It was a compelling argument. It might even be partly true. It was also, Harry had decided, completely irrelevant. Because even if Dumbledore had valid reasons for securing the Horcruxes, and Harry was willing to concede that he might have, that didn't explain the gold. It didn't explain the core binding. It didn't explain the tracking charms. It didn't explain the cupboard under the stairs. And it didn't explain why Dumbledore had done all of it without telling anyone, without legal authority, without oversight, without the knowledge or consent of the person he was supposedly protecting. You didn't get to save the world by robbing a child and call it heroism. That was Harry's position, and it was unshakable. Grip hook. Mr. Potter. The Horcrux angle. We've prepared for it. Extensively. If Dumbledore raises it as a defense, Madame Bones is prepared to ask 3 questions. Grip hook held up a gnarled finger. First, if the artifacts were corrupted, why did he not report this to the DMLE? Horcruxes are classified dark objects. There are legal procedures for their handling and destruction. A second finger. Second, if his goal was to destroy the Horcruxes, why are the artifacts still intact? 3 years have passed since our investigation became public. He's had ample time. A third finger. Third, if he took the artifacts to protect the wizarding world, why did he also take the gold? What does 47,000 galleons have to do with fighting Voldemort? Harry nodded. And the core binding? There is no defense for that. None. Binding a child's magical core is a Class 3 criminal offense under the Statute of Magical Welfare. It carries a mandatory sentence of 5 years in Azkaban. He won't go to Azkaban. No. He almost certainly won't. He has too many allies, too much political capital. But the charge will be public, the evidence will be irrefutable, and even his supporters will struggle to justify it. Harry closed his books and stacked them neatly. This was a habit he'd picked up from the goblins, everything in its place, every detail attended to. Precision as philosophy. I want to see Madame Bones before the hearing, he said. Face to face. I've been communicating through solicitors for 3 years. It's time she met me. That can be arranged. And I want to visit the Potter properties. All of them. Before the hearing. Griphook raised an eyebrow. Any particular reason? I'm about to stand in front of the Wisengamot and claim 3 lordships. I should probably know what I'm lord of. Potter Manor was in ruins. Harry stood at the end of a long gravel drive, overgrown with weeds and flanked by oak trees that had been old when his great-great-grandparents were young, and looked at what was left of his family home. The main house, Georgian, according to the property records, 4 stories of honey-colored stone with tall windows and a columned entrance, had been gutted by fire. The roof was gone. The upper floors had collapsed inward. Only the ground floor walls still stood, blackened and jagged against the gray October sky. Death Eater attack, Griphook said, standing beside him. November 1981. Days after your parents' death at Godric's Hollow. The manor was unoccupied, your grandparents had already passed, and your parents were in hiding. The attackers destroyed it out of spite. Harry walked up the drive. The gravel crunched under his boots, dragon-hide boots, goblin-made, a gift from Ragnarok on his 9th birthday. The wards around the property were shattered, the remnants of once powerful protections hanging in the air like cobwebs. Harry could feel them with his magic, ghostly outlines of what they'd been, defensive enchantments layered over centuries, each generation of Potters adding their own. He stopped at the front door. The door itself was gone, burned away, but the frame remained, and carved into the stone lintel above it were 2 words, Aut viam invenium aut facium. I shall find a way or make one, Harry translated. 3 years of goblin education had included Latin, the goblins considered it essential for legal and magical work. Family motto? Since the founding of the house. Harry reached up and touched the carved words. The stone was warm under his fingers, warmer than it should have been on an autumn day, and he felt a pulse of recognition, the house knowing its heir, welcoming him home, mourning its own destruction. Can it be rebuilt? With sufficient gold and time, yes. The foundations are intact. The ward stones are damaged but not destroyed, they're buried in the bedrock beneath the house. A competent wardcrafter could use them as anchors for a new protective scheme. Harry walked through the doorway into what had been the entrance hall. The floor was marble under a layer of ash and debris. A grand staircase rose along the left wall, its upper reaches gone, its lower steps still solid. The remains of portraits hung on the walls, frames intact but canvases burned, the magical occupants fled or destroyed. He found the library. Or rather, the space where the library had been. 3 walls of empty shelves, some still standing, most collapsed. The books were gone, burned, presumably, along with everything else. How much was lost? The Potter Library was one of the largest private collections in Wizarding Britain. Estimated at 4,000 volumes. The property manifest lists them individually. Griphook paused. However, the most valuable texts, the grimoire, the family journals, the restricted works, were in the Gringotts vault. They survived. Small mercy. Harry moved through the ruins for another hour, letting the house show him what it had been. The dining room with its long table, now a charred skeleton. The sitting room where his grandmother's portrait had hung, the one he'd spoken to in the vault, Doria Potter, who'd called him by name and told him he looked like his father. The nursery on the second floor, which he could only see from below, the floor above having collapsed, but where he could just make out the remains of painted walls, blue sky, white clouds, golden snitches. Someone had painted snitches on the nursery walls for him. His parents, maybe. Or his grandparents. Someone who had wanted him, who had prepared a room for him, who had imagined him growing up here among books and magic and the accumulated warmth of centuries of family. And instead he'd grown up in a cupboard. Harry left the manor. His face was dry, but the air around him crackled. Godric's Hollow next, he said. I want to see where they died. The cottage at Godric's Hollow was smaller than Harry expected. A 2-story house at the end of a lane, its upper floor blown apart, the rest frozen in the moment of destruction by preservation charms that someone, the ministry, probably, had placed on it as a memorial. There was a sign in front. It appeared when Harry approached, gold letters on dark wood, on this spot, on the night of October 31st, 1981, Lily and James Potter lost their lives. Their son, Harry, remains the only wizard ever to have survived the killing curse. This house, invisible to Muggles, has been left in its ruined state as a monument to the Potters and as a reminder of the violence that tore apart their family. People had written on the sign. Graffiti, but not the ugly kind, messages of support, of gratitude, of hope. Good luck, Harry, wherever you are. And the Potters will never be forgotten. And long live the boy who lived. Harry read them all. He didn't know how to feel about them. These people, these strangers who'd written on a sign outside a dead family's house, they cared about him. Or they cared about the idea of him. The symbol. The boy who lived. The child who defeated the Dark Lord and then vanished into obscurity while the man responsible for that obscurity spent a decade spending his gold and stealing his birthright. He went inside. The ground floor was intact. A small kitchen. A sitting room with a couch and an armchair and a cold fireplace. Photographs on the mantelpiece, and here Harry stopped, because he had never seen photographs of his parents. James Potter had messy black hair and glasses and a grin that suggested he was always either just about to do something reckless or had just finished doing it. Lily Potter had red hair and green eyes, his eyes, Harry realized with a jolt, and a smile that was gentler than James's but no less real. There was a photograph of them together, arms around each other, laughing at whoever was holding the camera. And one of Lily holding a baby, holding him, tiny and bald and waving a fist, with an expression of such fierce, tender joy that Harry had to look away. He put the photographs in his pocket. They were his. Nothing on earth could have stopped him. The upper floor was where it had happened. Harry climbed the stairs, they groaned under his weight but held, and found the nursery. The door was hanging off its hinges. The crib was overturned. There was a scorch mark on the floor where Voldemort had stood, and another on the wall behind the crib where the killing curse had rebounded. Harry stood in the room where his mother had died for him, and he breathed, and he let himself feel it. Not grief, not exactly. He'd never known her. You couldn't grieve someone you'd never known, not really, no matter how much the photographs made you want to. What he felt was closer to anger, but deeper, colder. A fundamental sense of wrongness. This should not have happened. None of it should have happened. Not the murder, not the cupboard, not the theft, not the binding, not the decade of manipulation and neglect. "Grip hook," he said. "Mr. Potter. The will. My parents' will. You told me it was sealed. By Dumbledore, acting as chief warlock. Within hours of your parents' death. The contents have never been made public. But you have a copy. The goblins always have a copy. What does it say?" Griphook hesitated. In 3 years, he had come to know Harry well enough to understand that the boy did not ask questions he wasn't prepared to hear the answer to. "But this, your parents named Sirius Black as your godfather and primary guardian. In the event of his inability to serve, guardianship was to pass to Alice and Frank Longbottom, then to Minerva McGonagall, then to Amelia Bones." Griphook paused. "The will specifically states, and I quote, 'Under no circumstances is Harry to be placed with Petunia and Vernon Dursley.' Your mother was emphatic on this point. There is a full paragraph explaining why." Harry was quiet for a very long time. "Sirius Black," he said. "He's in Azkaban. For betraying my parents. So the official record states." "You don't sound convinced." "The goblins have examined the case. There are irregularities. Black was never given a trial. He was arrested and imprisoned on Dumbledore's testimony and the testimony of several Aurors. No veritaserum was administered. No pensive memories were entered into evidence. No investigation was conducted into the possibility of alternative explanations. No trial," Harry repeated. "My godfather, the man my parents chose to raise me, was thrown in prison without a trial, and the man who did it then sealed my parents' will, ignored their wishes, put me with the one family they explicitly said I should never go to, and started draining my vaults." "That is an accurate summary, yes." Harry looked at the scorch mark on the floor. "Add it to the case file. The sealed will. Black's imprisonment. All of it. It's already there. It has been since the beginning." "Good." Harry descended the stairs. At the front door, he paused and looked back at the ruined cottage, at the photographs he'd taken, at the messages strangers had written on the sign, at the place where his life had been irrevocably altered by a curse and a prophecy and the machinations of an old man who thought he knew best. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, Griphook confirmed. Harry stepped out into the October air and disapparated, sighed along with Griphook, a technique the goblins had taught him that didn't require the ministry-approved, and ministry-tracked, method. They vanished without a sound, leaving Godric's Hollow to its ghosts. Amelia Bones was not what Harry expected. He'd built a picture of her in his mind from 3 years of correspondence, precise, professional, relentless. The letters she'd written, to the goblins, to the solicitors, to the Wisengamot, were models of legal clarity, every word chosen for maximum impact, every argument constructed like a fortress. In person, she was a tall woman in her 40s with a square jaw and close-cropped gray hair and the kind of eyes that made you want to check whether you'd done anything wrong recently. She wore her DMLE robes like armor, which, given the protective enchantments woven into them, they literally were, and she carried herself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had been in law enforcement for 2 decades and had never once been tempted to look the other way. They met in a private room at Gringotts. Neutral ground. Harry had insisted, he didn't want to set foot in the ministry before the hearing, didn't want to give Dumbledore's allies any opportunity to intercept, delay, or accidentally misfile anything. Amelia looked at him for a long moment when he walked in. He could see her recalibrating. Whatever she'd expected from a 10-year-old, however precocious, however well-prepared, it wasn't this. The boy in front of her was calm in a way that children weren't supposed to be. He met her eyes directly. He shook her hand firmly. He sat down across from her and waited, without fidgeting, for her to speak first. "You're shorter than I imagined," Amelia said. Harry almost smiled. "I get that a lot. You understand what we're walking into? Better than most." Amelia opened a folder. "Then let's not waste time. I've reviewed the full case file, all 3,000 pages of it. The goblins are thorough. They take theft personally. As they should." She turned pages. "The financial case is airtight. Dumbledore can't dispute the withdrawals, they're in Gringotts' own records, verified by goblin magic. The guardianship document is fraudulent under goblin law, which is the controlling authority for vault access. The gold will be returned with interest and penalties. That's the easy part. And the hard part? The artifacts. The Horcrux defense." Amelia looked up. "You know he's going to use it." "I know. And you know that it complicates things." "Not legally, you're right, he had no authority to remove the objects regardless of their nature. But publicly. Politically. The moment Dumbledore says Voldemort in the Wizengamot chamber, half the members will wet themselves and the other half will suddenly find him very sympathetic. Which is exactly what he's counting on." Amelia studied him. "You've thought about this?" "For 3 years. Then tell me your strategy." "Not the legal strategy, I have that. Tell me what you're planning to do when you stand in front of the Wizengamot and Albus Dumbledore turns his twinkling eyes on you and says, 'My dear boy, everything I did was to protect you from the most terrible evil our world has ever known.'" Harry leaned forward. "I'm going to agree with him." Amelia blinked. In 3 years of correspondence, Harry had never once expressed anything but cold fury toward Dumbledore. "Explain." "He's going to frame this as a choice between him and Voldemort. Safety versus justice. The greater good versus individual rights. He's brilliant at that, at making complicated things seem simple, at reducing every argument to a binary where he's on the right side. So I refuse the binary. I don't dispute that Voldemort is a threat. I don't dispute that the Horcruxes needed to be addressed. I acknowledge all of it. I stand there and I say, yes, Albus Dumbledore may have had valid concerns about dark magic. And he addressed those concerns by stealing from orphans, binding children's magic, imprisoning innocent men without trial, violating goblin treaties, and operating outside every law and oversight mechanism that magical Britain has. If this is what the greater good looks like, then the greater good is the most dangerous idea in the world." Amelia was quiet for several seconds. "That's a good speech." "It's not a speech. It's the truth. Those aren't always the same thing. But in this case," she closed the folder. "In this case, they might be." She stood and walked to the window, or rather, to the enchanted panel that served as a window this deep underground, showing a charmed view of the sky above London. Grey clouds. October gloom. "I became head of the DMLE because I believed in the law," she said, her back to Harry. "Not in individuals. Not in heroes. Not in great men who tell you to trust them and ask you not to look too closely at what they're doing. The law. Imperfect, slow, frustrating, but the only thing standing between civilization and the rule of whoever happens to be most powerful." She turned back. "Dumbledore is the most powerful wizard alive. He has been operating above the law for decades, and everyone, myself included, has let him, because he's Albus Dumbledore and he defeated Grindelwald and surely he must know what he's doing. And now a 10-year-old boy has a better understanding of justice than the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and I find that both impressive and deeply depressing." She extended her hand again. "I'll see you on the 14th, Lord Potter. Don't be late." "I wouldn't dream of it." The nights before the hearing, Harry trained. Not because he needed to, the hearing was a legal proceeding, not a duel, but because training was how he processed things. The physicality of it, the focus it required, the way combat magic demanded your complete attention and left no room for anxiety or doubt. The Gringotts training cavern was deep in the earth, a natural cave system that the goblins had reinforced and warded over centuries. The walls were scarred with the marks of 1,000 training sessions, blast patterns and blade gouges and the smooth, glassy patches where fire magic had melted the stone. Harry stood in the center of the cavern with his eyes closed. He wore training leathers, goblin-made, spelled to absorb impact, and he was barefoot on the cold stone. His magic moved around him like a living thing, a current in the air, responsive to his thoughts but not quite under his conscious control. That was what the training was for, learning to shape intent into action without the intermediary of words or gestures. Goblin magic was old. Older than wands, older than Latin incantations, older than the entire framework of structured spellwork that wizards had developed. It was visceral, intuitive, physical, more like a martial art than an academic discipline. The goblins shaped metal and stone with magic because their ancestors had lived in the earth and the earth had taught them. Harry, trained by goblins, had learned to think about magic the same way. He opened his eyes and moved. The stone targets, goblin-forged constructs designed to simulate attackers, activated the instant he shifted his weight. 3 of them, fast, coming from different angles. Harry didn't think. Thinking was too slow. He let his magic react, and the first target shattered as a blade of compressed force hit it dead center. The second caught a bolt of white fire that melted it to slag. The third, the tricky one, the one that came from behind, met Harry's open palm, and the kinetic ward he projected caught it in midair, held it for a fraction of a second, and then accelerated it backward into the wall hard enough to crater the stone. 3 targets. Maybe 2 seconds. Your follow-through on the second was sloppy, said a voice from the cavern entrance. Warclaw, the senior combat instructor, the one Harry had put through a wall 6 months ago, walked in with his arms folded. He was squat and heavily muscled and covered in scars that he wore like medals. You're overcommitting to force. Fire needs precision, not power. You have power to spare. Start using less of it. I like power. I know you do. That's the problem. You've got a dragon's hoard of magic and you keep trying to bury everything under it. Against those targets, it works. Against a real opponent, someone smart, someone who's fought mages before, they'll let you exhaust yourself and then take you apart. Harry lowered his hand. The air around him was still shimmering, residual magic bleeding off. I don't exhaust. You know that. I know you haven't exhausted yet. There's a difference. Warclaw kicked a fragment of the first target out of his path and walked to the center of the cavern. Again. But this time, I want efficiency. Every strike should use exactly the force necessary, not a scrap more. Pretend your magic is gold and you're a goblin, spend only what you need. Harry grinned. It was an expression that transformed his face from serious bordering on severe to something that looked, briefly, like the child he was. Is that how you fight? Conservatively? That's how I survive. Warclaw raised a hand, and 3 new targets materialized. Surviving is the first thing. Winning is the second. Looking good doing it is a distant third, no matter what the warrior ballads say. Harry settled into his stance. The targets activated. He moved. This time, he was precise. The first target broke cleanly, a single strike, minimal force, maximum effect. The second dissolved under a hex that was barely visible, a whisper of magic that unraveled the construct's integrity without theatrics. The third he simply caught with his hand, channeling just enough kinetic force to stop its momentum, and then set it down gently on the stone floor. Better? Harry said. Warclaw tilted his head. Getting there. He paused. The hearing is in 3 days. I know. Are you ready? Legally, yes. Politically, probably. Emotionally, Harry shrugged. Ask me afterward. You'll be in a room with Dumbledore. First time. You've never been in the same room with him. I'm aware. Warclaw studied him with the practiced eye of someone who trained warriors. He'll try to get in your head. Not with magic, even he wouldn't dare that in the Wizengamot chamber. But he's got a way about him. A presence. People who meet Dumbledore for the first time tend to want to please him. It's not compulsion, or if it is, it's the natural kind, the kind that comes from a century of practice at being charming. I grew up with the Dursleys, Harry said. I'm immune to people who think their charm entitles them to my compliance. Just remember, he's going to look at you and see a child. Use that. Let him underestimate you. Harry's expression cooled. I don't let people underestimate me. I don't play games with perception. If Dumbledore looks at me and sees a child, that's his mistake, and he'll correct it when I speak. I'm not going to pretend to be less than I am. Warclaw held up his hands. Fair enough. Just don't put the chief warlock through a wall. The paperwork would be nightmarish. No promises. The night before the hearing, Harry sat in his room at Gringotts and opened the Potter grimoire to a passage he'd read many times. Power is not the ability to destroy. Any fool with enough force can destroy. Power is the ability to choose, to act with full knowledge of consequences and full willingness to accept them. The powerful do not hide. They do not equivocate. They do not seek permission from those who would deny them. They act, and the world arranges itself around the fact of their action. If you are reading this, you are a Potter. Act like one. Harry closed the book. He set it on the bedside table and lay back on his pillow and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would walk into the Wizengamot. Tomorrow he would stand in front of the most powerful legislative body in magical Britain and accuse its chief warlock of theft, fraud, child abuse, and the violation of a 500-year-old goblin treaty. He would do this at the age of 10, without a wand, without a single human ally aside from Amelia Bones, backed only by the Goblin Nation and 3 years of meticulous preparation. He should have been terrified. He wasn't. He was thinking about Sirius Black, rotting in Azkaban for 9 years without a trial. He was thinking about his parents, dead in a cottage in Godric's Hollow, their will sealed by the man who'd sworn to protect their son. He was thinking about a nursery with snitches painted on the walls and a cupboard under the stairs that smelled like dust. Tomorrow, the wizarding world would meet Harry Potter. Not the boy who lived, that was a story, a myth, a scar on a child's forehead repurposed as a symbol. The real Harry Potter. The one who had been forged in a cupboard and tempered in the deep fires of Gringotts and who intended, with absolute clarity of purpose, to hold the powerful accountable for what they had done. He reached out with his magic, just a tendril of awareness, stretching through the stone, through the earth, down to the deepest vaults where the Peverell vaults sat empty and waiting. He could feel the absence of the artifacts like phantom pain. For empty pedestals. For stolen legacies. I'm coming to get you, he thought, and somewhere in the deep dark, the vault hummed in answer. Harry slept. The morning came grey and cold, and Harry dressed with care. Not in goblin training leathers, this was not a battle, regardless of what it might feel like. He wore wizarding formal robes in deep black, cut close and clean, with the crests of 3 houses worked in silver thread on the left breast, the Potter stag, the Black Hound, the Peverell triangle and circle. The robes were new, tailored by a goblin clothier who had been making formal wear for magical nobility for 200 years and who had very strong opinions about the importance of proper hem length. Harry looked at himself in the mirror. A thin-faced boy with messy black hair and green eyes looked back. The scar was visible on his forehead, the lightning bolt, the mark of a curse and a miracle. He'd considered glamoring it, hiding it, not wanting to trade on the boy who lived mythology. He'd decided against it. Let them see it. Let them look at the scar and remember who gave it to him and think about what had happened afterward. Griphook met him at the entrance to the Gringotts lobby. The goblin was dressed in his own formal blacks, carrying a leather case that contained 3 years of audit documentation reduced to its most devastating essentials. Ragnarok was waiting by the front doors with 4 warrior guards. "Lord Potter," Ragnarok said. Harry paused. It was the first time anyone had used the title without the Black-Peverell appended to it. It felt deliberate. Personal. Director. "Before we go." Ragnarok reached into his coat and produced a small box of dark wood. He opened it. Inside, on a cushion of black velvet, lay 3 rings. The Potter ring, gold, set with a ruby, the stag crest engraved on the band. The black ring, silver, set with an onyx, the hound rampant. The Peverell ring, older than the others, a simple band of grey metal that Harry's magic recognized instantly as goblin forged, set with a black stone that seemed to drink the light. "You are entitled to wear these," Ragnarok said. "They are the Lord's rings of your 3 houses. Wearing them into the Wisengamot is a statement. It says you are claiming your seats, your votes, your authority. It says you are not a child asking for justice, you are a lord demanding it." Harry picked up the Potter ring first. It resized itself to fit his finger the moment he touched it, and a warmth spread up his arm. Family magic, the accumulated enchantments of generations, recognizing the blood of their heir. The black ring was colder, sharper, a different kind of magic, older, darker, but no less welcoming. The Peverell ring sang. It was not a sound that anyone else could hear. It was a vibration in Harry's magical core, a resonance, a harmony between the ring and the bloodline it represented. The black stone, the resurrection stone, Harry realized with a start, reading the recognition in his own magic, glowed for an instant, a deep, warm light that had nothing to do with death despite its name. Harry looked at his hands. 3 rings. 3 houses. 3 votes in the Wisengamot. 3 seats that had sat empty for a decade while their occupants slept in a cupboard. "Let's go," he said. They walked out of Gringotts into Diagon Alley, and the world changed. People stopped. They stared. A goblin director, for goblin warriors, and a 10-year-old boy in lord's robes walking through the middle of the most famous magical shopping street in Britain at 9 o'clock on an October morning, it was not something you saw every day. Harry didn't look at them. He walked with his shoulders back and his chin up, and the magic around him, his unbound, unrestricted, fully realized magic, hummed in the air like a promise. People who were sensitive to such things shivered as he passed. Those who weren't just felt an inexplicable urge to step out of his way. They reached the leaky cauldron. Passed through to Muggle London. Descended into the Ministry of Magic through the visitor's entrance, because Harry had refused to use the FLA network, too easy to redirect, too easy to intercept. The Ministry atrium was crowded. Word had gotten out, it always got out, and half of magical Britain seemed to have found an excuse to be at the Ministry on the morning of the Wisengamot hearing. They lined the atrium 3 deep, watching, whispering, craning for a glimpse. Harry walked through them. The crowd parted. Not because he pushed, because his magic did, gently, an unconscious projection of presence that created space around him without effort. Ragnarok walked at his right shoulder. Griphook walked at his left. The warrior guards flanked them. At the elevator, Amelia Bones was waiting. She wore her formal DMLE robes, scarlet and black, and her expression was set in the particular configuration of someone who was about to do something important and intended to do it properly. "Lord Potter. Madam Bones. The chamber is ready. Dumbledore is already inside." A pause. He brought supporters. Quite a few of them. "The gallery is full." "Good," Harry said. "I want witnesses." The elevator descended. The Wisengamot chamber waited below, a circular room of dark stone, tiered seating, and centuries of accumulated gravitas. The place where magical Britain made its laws and judged its criminals and, on days like today, confronted the gap between who it claimed to be and who it actually was. The doors opened. Harry stepped through. And across the chamber, seated in the chief warlock's chair with his silver beard and his half-moon spectacles and his twinkling blue eyes, Albus Dumbledore looked up and saw, for the first time, the boy he had wronged. Their eyes met. The twinkle died. Chapter 3, The Founders claim the Wisengamot chamber smelled like old stone and beeswax and the particular variety of nervous sweat that powerful people produced when they sensed the ground shifting beneath them. The tiered seats rose in concentric semicircles around a central floor, and every one of them was occupied. Plum-colored robes. Silver W's embroidered on breast pockets. Faces that ranged from curious to hostile to carefully, professionally blank. Harry catalogued all of it in the 3 seconds between stepping through the doors and reaching the petitioner's circle, a ring of inlaid bronze in the center of the chamber floor, worn smooth by centuries of people standing in it and asking for things they probably wouldn't get. He stepped into the circle. Ragnarok took position to his right. Griphook stood to his left, leather case in hand. Amelia Bones moved to the prosecution bench, a raised desk to one side of the floor, angled to face both the petitioner and the chief warlock's chair. And in that chair, elevated above the rest of the chamber on a platform of dark granite, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked at him properly for the first time. The man was old. That was the first thing, genuinely, visibly old, in a way that wizards rarely showed. The beard was silver white and long enough to tuck into a belt. The robes were deep purple, trimmed with silver stars that caught the wand light. The half-moon spectacles sat on a nose that had been broken at least once. And the eyes behind them were blue, startlingly, intensely blue, and they were fixed on Harry with an expression of gentle, grandfatherly concern that was so perfectly calibrated it could have been painted. Harry felt it. The pull. The warmth. The almost gravitational desire to trust this man, to confide in him, to accept the kindness in those blue eyes at face value. It wasn't magic, or if it was the kind that grew organically from decades of practice, from a lifetime of being the wisest person in every room, from the deep and genuine belief that he knew what was best. Harry let it wash over him and felt nothing. You had to have known warmth to be seduced by its imitation. Harry had grown up cold. The Wisengamot will come to order, Dumbledore said. His voice carried perfectly, not amplified by magic, just projected with the ease of a man who had been commanding rooms since before anyone present was born. We are convened for a hearing brought under Article 17 of the Wisengamot Charter by the petitioner, Harry James Potter, styled Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, regarding matters of inheritance fraud, unauthorized vault access, and treaty violation. Madam Bones, as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, will present the prosecution's case. I will preside. Objection, Amelia said, before Dumbledore had finished settling back into his chair. A murmur ran through the chamber. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose, politely, the way a teacher might acknowledge a student's unexpected question. Madam Bones? The chief warlock cannot preside over a hearing in which he is the accused party. I move that an acting chair be appointed for the duration of these proceedings. I nominate Griselda Marchbanks. Now, Amelia, I hardly think, Article 31, subsection 4. No member of the Wisengamot may sit in judgment of a case in which they hold a material interest. You, Professor Dumbledore, are the subject of this petition. You cannot also be its judge. This is not a request. Silence. Harry watched the chamber react, the quick exchange of glances, the shifting in seats, the almost physical recalculation of allegiance that happened when someone publicly challenged Dumbledore and didn't immediately burst into flames. Dumbledore held Amelia's gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled, warm, rueful, the smile of a man conceding a point with grace. Quite right, of course. Madam Marchbanks, if you would be so kind. An ancient witch in the front row, Griselda Marchbanks, who had been on the Wisengamot since the Grindelwald era and who, Harry knew from his research, was one of the few members who owed Dumbledore nothing, rose and made her way to the chair. Dumbledore descended to the respondent's bench with every appearance of good humor, as though the whole thing were a minor procedural formality that he found mildly amusing. Harry noted the performance and filed it away. Dumbledore had conceded the chair without a fight, which meant he'd anticipated the objection and decided that resisting it would cost him more than yielding. Smart. Every move calculated. The hearing will proceed, Marchbanks said. Her voice was thin but sharp, a needle to Dumbledore's velvet. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, you have brought this petition. State your case. Harry had prepared for this moment for 3 years. He had written speeches and discarded them. He had rehearsed arguments and abandoned them. In the end, he had decided to do what the Potter Grimoire advised, speak the truth, simply, and let its weight do the work. Madam Marchbanks. Members of the Wisengamot. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, the chamber's acoustics carried every word, and the silence was absolute. My name is Harry Potter. I am the last heir of the houses of Potter, Black, and Peverell. I am 10 years old. And for the first 7 years of my life, I was kept in a cupboard under the stairs by Muggle relatives who were paid, from my own family's gold, to house me, and who used that gold for themselves while they starved and beat me. He paused. Not for effect, because the next part mattered, and he wanted it to land. I am not here to ask for sympathy. I am here because the man responsible for my placement, for the theft of my family's wealth, and for the removal of irreplaceable artifacts from goblin-held vaults is sitting in this chamber, and he has never been held to account. That man is Albus Dumbledore. The murmur this time was louder. Harry ignored it. Madame Bones will present the evidence. Director Ragnarok of Gringotts will attest to the financial records. I ask only that you listen, that you examine the evidence on its merits, and that you remember, when the defense is made, as I'm certain it will be, that everything was done for the greater good, that the greater good was purchased with an orphan's gold and a child's suffering, and no one ever asked the child if he agreed to the price. He stepped back. The chamber was very quiet. Marchbanks turned to Amelia. Madam Bones. Present your case. What followed was 3 hours of meticulous, systematic devastation. Amelia Bones had not become head of the DMLE by being dramatic. She was methodical. She was precise. She was the kind of prosecutor who didn't reach for the jugular because she didn't need to, she simply laid out fact after fact after fact until the accumulated weight became unbearable. The financial evidence came first. Griphook took the witness stand, a raised platform to the right of the floor, and presented the audit findings with the flat, clinical efficiency of a surgeon describing an operation. Withdrawals. Dates. Amounts. The fraudulent guardianship document, enlarged to fill a magical display that hovered in the center of the chamber, every member of the Wisengamot able to read the signature at the bottom. Albus P.W.B. Dumbledore, Magical Guardian. This document, Griphook said, was never ratified by the Goblin Nation. Under the Treaty of 1403, which governs all vault access protocols, guardianship claims over goblin-held accounts must be approved by the Director of Gringotts. No such approval was sought or given. The document is, under goblin law, a forgery. A strong word, said a voice from the gallery, a thin wizard with slick back hair and an oily smile that Harry recognized from his research as Lucius Malfoy. The man wasn't on the Wisengamot, but he'd secured a gallery seat, and he was watching the proceedings with the bright-eyed attention of a snake watching 2 rats fight. A precise word, Griphook corrected, without looking at him. The gold trail was damning, but it was the artifact evidence that changed the temperature of the room. Between 1982 and 1988, Amelia said, standing now, pacing the floor with controlled energy, Albus Dumbledore accessed the Peverell Vault, Vault 3 of Gringotts, one of the oldest vaults in existence, on 7 separate occasions. During these visits, he removed a total of 43 items. Among them, she tapped the display, and 4 images appeared, each one a detailed illustration from the Peverell Vault Manifest. The Sword of Godric Gryffindor. The Cup of Helga Hufflepuff. The Locket of Salazar Slytherin. The Diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. The reaction was immediate and visceral. The Founder's artifacts were not abstract concepts to the people in this room. They were legends. They were the physical legacy of the 4 witches and wizards who had built the institution that had educated every person in the chamber. They were sacred in a way that transcended politics. And Dumbledore had taken them. These artifacts, Amelia continued, her voice cutting through the growing noise, were placed in Goblin custody in 1487 under a binding trust agreement. They are the property of Hogwarts and its rightful heirs. Their removal constitutes a violation of the Gringotts-Wisengamot Treaty, a treaty that has governed relations between the Goblin nation and Wizarding Britain for over 5 centuries. She let that sink in. Then she turned to the respondent's bench. Professor Dumbledore. You have heard the charges. You have seen the evidence. Do you wish to respond? Dumbledore rose. And Harry, watching him, had to admire the sheer artistry of it. There was no defensiveness. No anger. No bluster. Dumbledore stood with the quiet gravity of a man carrying a terrible burden, a man who had done difficult things for noble reasons and was now, reluctantly but willingly, prepared to explain himself. Madame Marchbanks. Members of the Wisengamot. Madame Bones. A pause. A slight incline of the head toward Harry. Lord Potter. His voice was warm. Measured. The voice of a man who had all the time in the world and nothing to hide. I do not dispute the facts as presented. I accessed the vaults. I removed the artifacts. I arranged Harry's placement with his relatives. All of this is true. Another murmur. Dumbledore's supporters in the gallery, and there were many, leaned forward. I did these things because I had to. Not for personal gain, I have never spent a canute of Potter gold on myself, but because the wizarding world faced, and continues to face, a threat so grave that extraordinary measures were, and remain, necessary. He turned to the full chamber. The blue eyes swept the tears, making contact, drawing people in. On the night of October 31, 1981, Lord Voldemort, a collective flinch. Even now, even here, the name had power. Attacked the Potters at Godric's Hollow. He murdered James and Lily Potter. He attempted to murder their infant son. He failed, and the nature of that failure is at the heart of everything I have done since. Dumbledore paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, graver. Voldemort did not die that night. He was diminished, disembodied, stripped of his physical form, but he did not die. And the reason he did not die is that he had taken steps to anchor his soul to the mortal world. Steps so dark, so terrible, that I hesitate to speak of them even here. Speak of them, Marchbanks said flatly. Dumbledore inclined his head. Horcruxes. The darkest magic known to our kind. The deliberate fracturing of the human soul and its imprisonment in physical objects. Voldemort created multiple Horcruxes, and he chose as their vessels objects of enormous magical and historical significance. Among them, the Cup of Hufflepuff. The Locket of Slytherin. The Diadem of Ravenclaw. The chamber erupted. Marchbanks banged her gavel, actually banged it, something Harry suspected hadn't happened in decades, and called for order. It took nearly a minute. I removed these objects from the Peverell vault, Dumbledore said, into the restored silence, because they were corrupted beyond measure. They were vessels for fragments of Voldemort's soul. Leaving them in a vault, even a vault as secure as Gringotts, was a risk I could not accept. These objects influence those around them. They corrupt. They possess. They are, in a very real sense, alive with the darkest magic imaginable. He looked at Harry. The expression was one of deep, genuine sorrow. As for Harry's placement with the Dursleys, I am grieved to learn of his mistreatment. Truly, deeply grieved. The blood wards I placed around that house were the strongest protection I could provide, keyed to the sacrifice Lily Potter made for her son. They could only function if Harry lived with a blood relative. I chose the Dursleys because they were the only option that would keep Harry safe from the remnants of Voldemort's followers, many of whom would have killed him without hesitation. And the core binding? Amelia interjected. Dumbledore didn't miss a beat. A precaution. Harry's magical core is extraordinary. Even as an infant, his raw power was remarkable. An uncontrolled magical core in a child living among Muggles would have caused incidents that would have drawn attention, revealed his location, and potentially endangered his life. I bound his core temporarily, intending to release it when he entered Hogwarts and could be properly supervised. Temporarily, Amelia repeated. For 7 years. I intended to release it at 11. I was, perhaps, overcautious. But the alternative, Harry said, stepping forward into the petitioner's circle, was trusting me. The chamber went still. Harry hadn't planned to speak. He'd intended to let Amelia handle the cross-examination, to play the role of silent, dignified petitioner. But Dumbledore's performance, because that's what it was, a performance, pitch-perfect and devastating, demanded an answer, and the answer had to come from him. Professor Dumbledore. He kept his voice level. You've explained why you took the artifacts. You've explained why you placed me with the Dursleys. You've explained why you bound my magic. Each explanation is logical. Each one invokes necessity, danger, the greater good. And each one has the same fundamental flaw. He took a step closer to the respondent's bench. Dumbledore watched him with those blue eyes, and Harry saw it, behind the performance, behind the warmth and the sorrow and the grandfather mask, a flicker of something cold. Assessment. Calculation. The look of a chess player recognizing that a piece had moved in an unexpected direction. You didn't ask, Harry said. You didn't ask the goblins for permission to access my vaults. You didn't ask the Wizengamot for authority to seal my parents' will. You didn't ask anyone to approve my placement, and my parents' will, which you sealed, explicitly stated that I was never to go to the Dursleys. You didn't ask a healer to evaluate whether a core binding was necessary. You didn't ask the DMLE to handle the Horcruxes through proper channels. You didn't ask for a trial for Sirius Black, my parents' chosen guardian, before you threw him in Azkaban and took his place. Harry's voice hadn't risen. It didn't need to. You did all of it alone. In secret. Without oversight, without consent, without legal authority. And when your decisions resulted in a child being beaten and starved for 7 years, you didn't know, because you never checked. You placed your monitoring charms and you went back to your office and you assumed that the situation was handled, because Albus Dumbledore's plans are always correct, and the details take care of themselves. The silence was so complete that Harry could hear the torches flickering in their brackets. I don't dispute that Voldemort is a threat. I don't dispute that the Horcruxes are dangerous. I acknowledge that you may have believed you were acting in my interest and in the interest of the wizarding world. But belief is not authority. Good intentions are not legal standing. And the phrase, the greater good, does not, has never, and will never grant any individual, no matter how powerful, no matter how respected, the right to operate outside the law. He turned from Dumbledore to the Wizengamot. Row after row of faces. Some sympathetic. Some hostile. Most somewhere in between, caught in the uncomfortable gap between what they felt and what they could no longer deny. If Professor Dumbledore believed the Horcruxes needed to be secured, the law provided mechanisms for that. If he believed I was in danger, the law provided protections. If he believed Sirius Black was guilty, the law provided trials. He chose not to use any of them. He chose, instead, to handle everything himself, because he believed, as he has always believed, that he knows best. Harry paused. Then, quietly, he was wrong. And a lot of people paid for it. He stepped back into the circle. The chamber remained silent for a long moment, and then Marchbanks spoke. Professor Dumbledore. You have heard the petitioner's response. What is your answer? Dumbledore was quiet. For the first time since the hearing began, the mask, the warm, wise, grandfatherly mask, showed a crack. Not a large one. Not visible to most people in the chamber. But Harry saw it, and Amelia saw it, and Ragnock, standing silent at Harry's right, bared his teeth a fraction of an inch. I have made mistakes, Dumbledore said. His voice was softer now. Not defeated, Dumbledore was too skilled, too experienced, too convinced of his own rightness to sound defeated, but chastened. Or performing chastened, which was functionally the same thing. I have always acted with the best of intentions, but I acknowledge that intentions alone are insufficient. If the Wizengamot determines that my actions warrant censure, I will accept that determination with humility. With humility, Amelia repeated, and there was an edge in her voice that could have cut glass. Not with resignation from your positions. I believe I can still serve. The question before this body, Marchbanks interrupted, is not whether Professor Dumbledore can still serve. The question is whether the evidence presented warrants formal charges. She surveyed the chamber. We will vote. Madam Bones, state the charges. Amelia straightened. Charge 1, unauthorized access to goblin-held vaults in violation of the Treaty of 1403. Charge 2, financial fraud against the estates of 3 ancient and noble houses. Charge 3, removal of protected artifacts in violation of the Gringotts Trust Agreement of 1487. Charge 4, illegal binding of a minor's magical core, a Class 3 offense under the Statute of Magical Welfare. Charge 5, sealing of the Potter will without Wizengamot authorization. Charge 6, placement of a magical child in an abusive environment without oversight. 6 charges. Each one capable of ending a career. Together, they were a demolition. All those in favor of proceeding to formal trial on these charges? Marchbanks said. The vote was not close. It wasn't unanimous. Dumbledore's loyalists held firm, and a block of what Harry estimated was about 30% of the chamber voted against. But the rest, the ones who had heard the evidence and seen the documents and watched Dumbledore's careful, brilliant defense unravel under the simple weight of a child's question, voted in favor. Marchbanks counted. The motion carries. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, you will stand trial before the full Wizengamot on these charges. The trial is set for, she consulted briefly with a clerk. January 15th. 3 months. Time for both sides to prepare. Time for the political machinery to grind. In the interim, Marchbanks continued, and in light of the severity of the charges, I am suspending the respondent from his position as Chief Warlock pending the outcome of the trial. Now the chamber erupted. Dumbledore's supporters were on their feet. Shouts of protest. Accusations of overreach. A red-faced wizard in the third row whose name Harry didn't know was practically vibrating with outrage. Marchbanks let them yell. Then she banged her gavel once, and the sound carried with it a pulse of magical authority, the authority of the chair, ancient and non-negotiable, that silenced the room. I said interim. If Professor Dumbledore is cleared, his position will be restored. If he is not, the suspension will become permanent. This is consistent with Wizengamot precedent, and I will not debate it. She looked at Dumbledore. You retain your position as headmaster of Hogwarts and as supreme mugwump of the International Confederation. For now. Dumbledore inclined his head. If the suspension stung, he showed no sign. The mask was back in place, warm, understanding, patient. The mask of a man who had weathered storms before and would weather this one. Harry watched him. And saw, beneath the mask, the rapid movement of a mind already working on the next strategy. Dumbledore was not defeated. He was regrouping. One more matter, Harry said, and the chamber, which had been beginning to dissolve into conversation, snapped back to attention. Marchbanks raised an eyebrow. Lord Potter. The artifacts. The Founder's relics. Regardless of the outcome of the trial, those items are the property of the Peverell Vault and, through it, of Hogwarts. I am requesting their immediate return. The Horcruxes, someone in the gallery started, are a problem that the DMLE, the Goblin Nation, and the Department of Mysteries are collectively better equipped to handle than a single individual, however well-intentioned. Harry looked at Dumbledore. I am not asking for the Horcruxes to be ignored. I am asking for them to be handled properly. Through channels. With oversight. With expertise beyond one man's judgment. And if I have already taken steps to address the Horcruxes? Dumbledore said. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to Harry since the hearing began, and his voice held something new, not warmth, not calculation, but something almost like respect. Almost. If the process of neutralizing them is delicate, ongoing, and would be disrupted by transferring custody, then you should have no difficulty explaining that process to Madame Bones and the Department of Mysteries, who can evaluate whether your approach is sound and provide additional resources. Harry didn't blink. Transparency, Professor. It's not a difficult concept. For some of us, Dumbledore said quietly, it is more difficult than you might imagine. And for a moment, just a moment, Harry thought he saw something genuine behind the blue eyes. Not manipulation. Not strategy. Something closer to weariness. The exhaustion of a man who had been carrying the weight of the world for so long that he had forgotten there were other shoulders available. Harry noted it. He did not soften. The request stands, he said to Marchbanks. Formal return of all artifacts to Gringotts custody within 30 days, with DMLE oversight of any that are confirmed as Horcruxes. So ordered, Marchbanks said. This hearing is adjourned. The corridor outside the Wizengamot chamber was chaos. Reporters. Photographers. Ministry officials who wanted to be seen near the story. Members of the public who had bribed or charmed their way past security. The noise hit Harry like a physical force as he stepped through the doors, a wall of shouted questions and flashing cameras and the particular feeding frenzy energy of a press corps that smelled blood in the water. Lord Potter. Lord Potter. Is it true you were raised by Muggles? Harry. Over here. Can you tell us, Lord Potter-Black-Peverell? What are your intentions regarding the Wizengamot seats? Ragnarok's warrior guards closed around Harry in a diamond formation, and the crowd parted, not willingly, but inevitably, because goblin warriors in full armor projecting mild hostility were not something even the most aggressive journalist was willing to test. They made it to the elevator. The doors closed. Silence. That went well, Griphook said, in a tone that suggested he was willing to entertain the possibility. It went as expected, Harry said. He was leaning against the elevator wall, and for the first time all day, he looked his age, tired, a little overwhelmed, running on determination and adrenaline. He'll use the 3 months before the trial to rebuild support. He'll give interviews. He'll remind everyone about Grindelwald and the First War and every good thing he's ever done. By January, half the country will think I'm an ungrateful child attacking a hero. And the other half? Ragnarok asked. The other half will have read the evidence. That's enough. The elevator reached the atrium level. The doors opened onto another crowd, but this one was different, quieter, more watchful. And standing at its edge, looking uncomfortable and out of place and clutching a rolled-up copy of the Daily Prophet, was a round-faced boy about Harry's age with dirt under his fingernails and the unmistakable wide-eyed expression of someone who had been dragged somewhere by a relative and had no idea what was happening. The woman beside him was tall and severe, wearing a stuffed vulture hat that defied several laws of physics. She had one hand on the boy's shoulder in a grip that looked more like restraint than comfort. Lord Potter, the woman said, stepping forward with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. I am Augusta Longbottom, Regent of the House of Longbottom. This is my grandson, Neville. I believe we have matters to discuss. Harry looked at Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom looked at Harry Potter. Two boys, both heirs to old families, both shaped by a war they didn't remember and adults who had failed them in different ways. Neville's eyes went to Harry's forehead, then his rings, then his face. He swallowed. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Harry said. "Gran says you just told off Dumbledore in front of the whole Wizengamot." "Something like that." "Wicked." Neville's face broke into an involuntary grin that he immediately tried to suppress, glancing at his grandmother as if expecting disapproval. Augusta Longbottom's expression didn't change, but something around her eyes softened a fraction. "Madam Longbottom," Harry said, turning to Augusta. "You said we have matters to discuss. Can I assume this is about the Longbottom proxy?" Augusta's eyebrows rose. The Longbottom proxy, the right of the Longbottom house to vote in the Wizengamot, had been held by Augusta since her son Frank's incapacitation. But the Longbottom and Potter families had historical alliances, voting blocs that went back centuries, and the reactivation of the Potter seats changed the political arithmetic. "You've done your research," Augusta said. "I've had 3 years. Then you know that the Longbottom house traditionally aligns with Potter on matters of governance." "I know that. I also know that traditional alignments mean nothing if they're not grounded in shared principles. I'm not interested in collecting votes, Madam Longbottom. I'm interested in allies who believe in accountability." Augusta studied him the way a jeweler studied a gem, looking for flaws, testing for value. "You're very direct for a 10-year-old. I've been told. Frank was the same way. Your father, too." Something shifted in her face, old grief, carefully managed. "Come to Longbottom Hall this weekend. Bring your goblin advisors if you like. We'll talk properly." "I'd like that." Augusta nodded once, sharp and decisive, and turned to go. Neville lingered for a second. "Did you really grow up in a cupboard?" he asked, quietly enough that his grandmother couldn't hear. "Yeah." Neville's face did something complicated. "I grew up with Gran. She's not, I mean, she's fine, she's just," he struggled. "She wanted me to be like my dad. I'm not. I'm just, me." Harry looked at this round-faced, nervous boy who was apologizing for not being someone else, and something in his chest, the same chest that held his magic, his anger, his cold determination, did something unexpected. It softened. "Just you sounds all right to me," Harry said. Neville blinked. Then the grin came back, wider this time, and he didn't try to suppress it. "See you this weekend," he said. "Count on it." The Daily Prophet hit the streets the next morning with a headline that occupied the entire front page: "Boy who lived accuses Dumbledore of theft, fraud, and child abuse, Wizengamot suspends Chief Warlock." The article was surprisingly thorough. Rita Skeeter had written it, which meant it was sensationalized and occasionally inaccurate, but the core facts were there, pulled from the public record of the hearing. The photograph showed Harry standing in the petitioner's circle with Ragnarok and Griphook flanking him, 3 house rings visible on his hand, his face calm and his green eyes steady. Harry read it over breakfast in his room at Gringotts, eating porridge that was considerably better than anything the Dursleys had ever provided, and considered the landscape. The hearing had achieved its primary objectives. Dumbledore was suspended as Chief Warlock. The formal trial was set. The artifact return was ordered. The evidence was public. But the hearing was not the war. The hearing was the opening move. The war was political, ongoing, and far from decided. Dumbledore was already moving. The Evening Prophet had carried a sympathetic interview, not with Dumbledore himself, who was too canny for that, but with Elphias Doge, his oldest friend, who painted a picture of a dedicated, selfless hero being attacked by an ungrateful child manipulated by goblins. The message was clear: don't trust the boy. Don't trust the goblins. Trust the man who defeated Grindelwald and has protected you for 50 years. It was effective. Harry had expected it to be. You didn't fight Albus Dumbledore's reputation head-on, you went around it. You made the fight about evidence, not personality. About law, not loyalty. The letters, Griphook said, entering with a stack of mail that required its own cart. 47 owls this morning. 12 from Wisengamot members requesting meetings. 8 from journalists requesting interviews. 3 from law firms offering their services. 1 from the minister's office, personally. What does Fudge want? A private meeting to discuss matters of mutual concern. Translation: he wants to know which way the wind is blowing so he can position himself accordingly. Tell him I'm busy. Indefinitely. Until he demonstrates the capacity for an independent thought. So yes, indefinitely. Griphook's mouth twitched. And the other letters? Wisengamot members first. Sort them into 3 categories: genuine allies, opportunists, and Dumbledore plants. I'll meet the first group. I'll acknowledge the second. The third can wait. The journalists? 1 interview. Choose the most credible, least sensational outlet. I want accuracy, not drama. The facts are dramatic enough on their own. Harry finished his porridge and reached for the Potter grimoire. He'd been studying a section on magical resonance, the way objects and their creators remained connected through sympathetic bonds, even across great distances. It was relevant to the Horcrux problem, which was never far from his thoughts. Because that was the thing no one in the Wisengamot had asked, the question that lurked beneath the entire hearing like a shark beneath calm water: what do you do with a Horcrux? Dumbledore claimed to have been working on the problem. Maybe he had. But Harry's research, extensive, thorough, drawing on the Potter grimoire and the Black family's vast collection of dark arts texts and Gringotts' own archives, suggested that Horcrux destruction was not particularly complicated. It required a substance capable of causing damage beyond magical repair, basilisk venom, fiendfire, or goblin-forged weapons impregnated with destructive agents. The sword of Gryffindor, forged in goblin fire, would serve admirably. So why hadn't Dumbledore destroyed them? Harry had theories. None of them were comfortable. The most benign was that Dumbledore was studying the Horcruxes, trying to understand their magic, using them to build a picture of Voldemort's vulnerabilities. The least benign, Harry turned a page in the grimoire and found a passage he'd bookmarked months ago. The soul is not a simple thing. It can be fragmented, yes, the darkest of magics allow this, at the cost of everything that makes a soul worth having. But understand, a fragment, once separated, retains a connection to both its vessel and its origin. Where there is a fragment, there is a thread. Follow enough threads, and you find the spider. But beware the spider who lays fragments in the path of those who hunt him. For the threads run both ways, and the hunter who touches a Horcrux may find that the Horcrux has touched him back. Harry closed the book. His hand went to his scar. It had been a theory for months. A quiet, cold suspicion that he had not shared with anyone, not Ragnarok, not Griphook, not even Silvertongue, who had healed his body but had noted, in her initial examination, an anomaly in the scar that she couldn't identify. An anomaly. A fragment. Harry pressed his fingers to the lightning bolt and reached inward with his magic, carefully, delicately, the way you'd probe a wound you suspected was deeper than it looked. And there, beneath the scar, tangled into the edges of his own magical core like a parasite woven into its host, he felt it. A piece of something that was not him. Cold. Dark. Sleeping. A piece of Tom Riddle's soul. Harry withdrew his magic and sat very still for a very long time. Then he stood, picked up the grimoire, and went to find Ragnarok. The goblin ritual chambers were deeper than anything else in Gringotts, below the vaults, below the dragon caverns, below the underground rivers. Carved from living rock by the first goblins to settle beneath London, they were places of power in the oldest sense, nodes where the magical currents of the earth converged, where the boundaries between physical and metaphysical grew thin. Harry lay on a stone slab in the center of the largest chamber. It was cold, but not uncomfortably so. The goblins had warmed the stone with runework. Around him, in a circle, stood Ragnarok, Silvertongue, Bogrod the Wardbreaker, and 3 goblin elders whose names Harry had never been given and suspected he never would be. They wore white, ritual white, unadorned, the color of beginnings and endings. "You're certain," Ragnarok said, for the 3rd time. "I'm certain." Harry's voice was steady. "I can feel it. It's been there since that night, since the curse rebounded. A piece of him lodged in my scar. Goblin soul magic is not gentle, Lord Potter. The extraction, if it works, will be the most painful thing you have ever experienced. More painful than a cupboard." The joke fell flat. Ragnarok's expression didn't change. "I mean it, Harry. First name." Ragnarok never used first names. "This could kill you. Leaving it there will definitely kill me. Maybe not today. But Voldemort is coming back, everyone who isn't actively lying to themselves knows it. And when he does, this thing in my scar will be a connection. A window. A door he can walk through." Harry met Ragnarok's eyes. "I will not carry a piece of Tom Riddle in my head for 1 day longer than I have to." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Begin," he said. The elders started chanting. Not in gobbledygook, in something older, a language that predated the goblin nation itself, guttural and rhythmic and resonant in a way that made the stone vibrate. Bogrod stepped forward and began tracing runes on the slab around Harry's body, each one flaring gold as it was completed. Silvertongue placed her hands on Harry's temples. "Focus on the fragment," she said. "Find it. Isolate it from your own magic. Hold it separate." Harry closed his eyes. He reached inward again, past the humming warmth of his own core, past the familiar currents of his magic, down to the cold, dark thing nestled behind his scar. It stirred as he touched it, sluggishly, like something waking from a long sleep. He wrapped his magic around it. Contained it. Held it separate. It fought. Not with intelligence, this was not Voldemort, not really, just a fragment, a splinter. But it had survival instincts, and they were strong, and it lashed out with a cold, venomous fury that sent lances of pain through Harry's skull. Harry held on. The pain was extraordinary. His scar felt like it was splitting open. His vision, even with his eyes closed, went white, then black, then red. The chanting grew louder. The runes flared brighter. Silvertongue's hands burned against his temples, pouring goblin magic into him, not healing magic this time but exorcism magic, ancient and brutal, designed to rip parasites from their hosts. Harry screamed. The fragment screamed, a soundless shriek that he felt in his bones, a dying thing's rage at being dragged from its hiding place. He could feel it tearing loose, feel the hooks it had sunk into his core being ripped free one by one, feel the bleeding gaps it left behind. Silvertongue's magic surged. The elders' chanting reached a crescendo. And with a sensation like having a tooth pulled from his soul, the fragment came free. It hung in the air above his scar for an instant, a wisp of darkness, a shadow with no source, writhing and screaming in silence. Then Bogrod snapped his hands together, and the rune circle flared white, and the fragment was caught, contained, imprisoned in a sphere of crystallized goblin magic that solidified around it like amber around an insect. It was the size of a marble. Inside, the fragment of Voldemort's soul twisted and thrashed, a tiny dark hurricane trapped in glass. Harry lay on the slab, gasping. Blood was running from his scar, fresh blood, bright red, the wound reopened by the extraction. His whole body was shaking. His magic was in chaos, roiling and surging, trying to fill the gaps where the fragment had been. But his head was clear. For the first time in his life, the first time in his memory, his head was clear. "Did it work?" he croaked. Silvertongue removed her hands from his temples. Her face was gray with exhaustion but her eyes were fierce. It worked. The fragment has been extracted and contained. She paused. Your scar will remain. The physical damage is permanent. But the connection, the bridge between you and the Dark Lord, is severed. Harry lay still for a moment. Breathing. Feeling the absence of something he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Then he sat up. Blood dripped down his forehead. He ignored it. That's one, he said, looking at the marble-sized prison in Bogrod's hands. How many more? Ragnarok looked grim. Based on our research and what Dumbledore revealed at the hearing, at least 3 confirmed. The cup, the locket, and the diadem. Possibly more. Then we destroy them. All of them. With the sword of Gryffindor, once it's returned. And if Dumbledore refuses to return it? Harry swung his legs off the slab. He was unsteady, drained, running on willpower, and the particular species of stubbornness that the goblins had learned, over 3 years, was his defining trait. He has 30 days. The Wizengamot ordered it. If the artifacts aren't back in Gringotts by then, Madame Bones and I will go and collect them. Harry looked at the dark fragment twisting in its prison, and his expression hardened into something that had no business on a 10-year-old's face. And if Dumbledore gets in the way, he'll find out exactly how much magic a Potter-Black-Peverell with an unbound core and goblin training can bring to bear. That, Ragnarok said quietly, is what I'm afraid of. Don't be afraid for him. Be afraid for anyone who stands between me and what's mine. The fragment screamed silently in its prison. Harry turned away from it and walked out of the chamber, leaving bloody footprints on the ancient stone. The weekend came, and Harry went to Longbottom Hall. It was nothing like Potter Manor, no ruins here, no fire damage. Longbottom Hall was a sprawling Tudor estate set in the rolling green countryside of Yorkshire, surrounded by greenhouses that stretched for acres. The Longbottoms had always been herbologists. The family fortune was built on centuries of breeding magical plants, developing potions ingredients, and maintaining one of the most comprehensive botanical collections in the wizarding world. Neville met him at the gate. The boy was wearing gardening gloves and an expression of mild panic. "Gran's been cleaning all morning," he said. "She made me change clothes twice. I think she wants to impress you." "Does she?" "She'll deny it if you ask. Just, don't mention the vulture hat. She knows it's ridiculous. She wears it on purpose. I've never figured out why." Harry found himself smiling. There was something about Neville Longbottom, an unguarded honesty, a willingness to say exactly what he was thinking without filters, that was disarming in a way that no amount of political sophistication could match. They walked the grounds. Neville talked about plants. Harry listened, not because he was particularly interested in venomous tentaculas or the proper soil pH for mandrakes, but because Neville transformed when he talked about them. The nervous, self-deprecating boy who apologized for existing became someone else entirely, animated, knowledgeable, passionate. "You're good at this," Harry said, watching Neville coax a reluctant Flutterby bush into bloom with a combination of careful pruning and what appeared to be genuine affection. Neville flushed. "It's just plants. It's not just anything. You know more about magical botany than most adult wizards. That's a skill, Neville. Own it." Neville was quiet for a moment, working the soil around the bush's roots. "People don't usually, Gran wants me to be good at dueling. Defense. The things my dad was good at. She got me Uncle Algy's old wand. It doesn't work right for me, but she says I just need to try harder." "You're using someone else's wand." "My dad's wand was, he's not dead, but he can't, my parents are in St. Mungo's. Long-term spell damage. They don't recognize me." Neville said this with the matter-of-fact flatness of someone who had learned to state the fact without touching the pain beneath it. "Gran keeps Dad's wand in a case at home. She won't let me use it. Says I haven't earned it. So she gave me Uncle Algy's." Harry stopped walking. "You need your own wand. Gran says, Neville. Harry turned to face him. A wand chooses the wizard. That's not a saying, it's magical law. Using a wand that doesn't match your core is like running with your shoes on the wrong feet. You can do it, but everything's harder and nothing works properly. He paused. Before the term starts, we're going to Ollivanders. You're getting your own wand. Gran won't, I'll talk to your Gran. Neville looked at him with an expression that Harry couldn't quite read. Why do you care? It was a genuine question. Not suspicious, just bewildered. As if the concept of someone caring about Neville Longbottom's wand situation was so foreign that it required explanation. Because you're my friend, Harry said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. And because I know what it's like when the adults in your life decide who you should be instead of helping you become who you are. Neville stared at him. Then he nodded, once, and went back to his plants, and they didn't talk about it anymore, but something had shifted between them, a foundation laid, a trust established, the quiet beginning of something that would matter. Augusta found them in the greenhouse an hour later. She'd abandoned the vulture hat. Neville had been right about her wanting to impress, and she got straight to business with a directness that Harry appreciated. The Longbottom proxy, she said, settling into a chair that Neville had cleared of potting soil. You want it. I want an alliance. Not a proxy. Your house retains its independence and its vote. I'm proposing a formal compact, Potter-Black-Peverell, Longbottom. For houses, coordinated but autonomous. When our interests align, we vote together. When they don't, we vote our conscience. And the trial? I expect your support. Not because I'm demanding it, because the evidence warrants it. If you review the case file and disagree, tell me honestly and we'll find other common ground. Augusta was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a thin, sharp expression that was nothing like Neville's open grin but was, in its way, equally genuine. Your father would have liked you, she said. He was a reckless, loud-mouthed troublemaker with more nerve than sense, and he was the most loyal friend Frank ever had. She paused. Your mother would have liked you more. She had the same look in her eyes, that try-me look. Lily never started fights. But she finished every one of them. Is that a yes? It's a yes. Provisionally, pending review of the evidence. But you knew that before you came. I hoped. Smart boy. Augusta stood. Now, about Neville's wand. Harry blinked. He told you. He didn't have to. I've been watching him struggle with Algy's wand for a year. I know it doesn't suit him. She stopped. Her jaw worked. I've been stubborn. His father was brilliant with Algy's wand. I wanted Neville to be someone he isn't, Harry said, gently. Augusta Longbottom, the most formidable woman in wizarding politics, looked at a 10-year-old boy and let him see her mistake. Yes, she said. That. Ollivanders. Before term. I'll go with him if you'd like. I'll take him myself. Augusta's chin lifted. It's past time I stopped trying to raise Frank and started raising Neville. From behind a row of potted fanged geraniums, Neville made a sound that might have been a sob or might have been a laugh and was probably both. Harry pretended not to hear. Some things were private. The 30 days passed. The artifacts were not returned. Harry stood in Ragnarok's office on the morning of the deadline and read Dumbledore's letter, delivered by Ministry Owl, formal, apologetic, explaining that the process of securing the Horcruxes for safe transport required additional time, that the delicacy of the dark magic involved could not be rushed, that he requested a 60-day extension. Harry set the letter down. He's stalling, he said. Obviously, Ragnarok agreed. He doesn't intend to return them at all. He thinks if he delays long enough, the political situation will shift. He'll win back support, get the charges reduced, negotiate a quiet settlement. The artifacts stay in his possession, the trial becomes a formality, and everything goes back to the way it was. That is likely his calculation, yes. Harry stood. Then we changed the calculation. How? The Wizengamot ordered the return. Dumbledore has defied that order. That gives Madame Bones the authority to enforce it. I'm going to Hogwarts. Ragnarok stood as well. Harry. Dumbledore on his own ground, in his own castle, surrounded by his own wards and his own staff, that is not the same as Dumbledore in the Wizengamot. I know exactly what it is. Harry reached for the grimoire, which was never far from him, and tucked it inside his robes. And I know something Dumbledore doesn't. Which is? Hogwarts isn't his castle. It isn't his ground. Hogwarts belongs to the founders, and through the Peverell and Potter bloodlines, it belongs to me. He's been sitting in my chair. I'm going to introduce myself. Harry walked out of the office. Behind him, Ragnarok closed his eyes and made a sound that, in a less dignified goblin, might have been a sigh. Then he called for the warrior guards. Chapter 4, The Hogwarts Letter. The owl arrived on the morning of Harry's 11th birthday, which struck him as almost comically redundant. He was sitting in his room at Gringotts, eating breakfast and reviewing the final preparations for what the goblins had taken to calling, with characteristic understatement, the Hogwarts matter, when a tawny owl swooped through the ventilation shaft, the only access point for postal owls this deep underground, and dropped a thick envelope on his plate. Harry picked it up. Heavy parchment. Green ink. The Hogwarts crest stamped in wax on the back. Mr. H. Potter. The room adjacent to Director Ragnarok's office, 7th sublevel, Gringotts Wizarding Bank, London. He turned it over. Opened it. Read the familiar words that every magical child in Britain received on their 11th birthday. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The supply list was standard. Robes. Books. A cauldron. A wand. One owl or cat or toad. Harry set the letter aside and returned to his bacon. Sentimental. Griphook said, appearing in the doorway. Practical. I need the letter for the enrollment records. It confirms my right to be on the grounds. Harry took a sip of tea. Has Bones confirmed? Madame Bones and 4 Aurors will meet us at the Hogwarts gates at noon. She's obtained an enforcement warrant from Acting Chief Warlock Marchbanks. Dumbledore has been formally notified. And his response? He expressed his willingness to cooperate fully and his hope that the matter can be resolved amicably. Translation: he's had all night to prepare, and he's ready for us. Almost certainly. Harry pushed back from the table. Good. I'd hate for this to be easy. He dressed with the same deliberate care he'd brought to the Wizengamot hearing, but today the choices were different. Not the formal robes of a lord addressing the legislature, today was operational. Black trousers. A close-fitted jacket of goblin-worked leather that would stop most hexes. Dragonhide boots. The 3 house rings. And at his hip, in a sheath that Warclaw had made for him and that was warded to the teeth, a goblin-forged short blade, not the sword of Gryffindor, which was one of the things he'd come to collect, but a training weapon that he could channel magic through almost as effectively. He looked at himself in the mirror. Thin face. Green eyes. The scar, healed now, faded since the Horcrux extraction, but still visible. Still a mark. Still a story. He ran a hand through his hair, gave up on it as a lost cause, and went to meet Ragnarok. The director was waiting in the lobby with a reduced escort, 2 warrior guards, Griphook, and Bogrod. They'd debated bringing more. Harry had argued for fewer. This was not an assault. It was an enforcement action, legal and documented, and he wanted it to look like one. The wards, Ragnarok said, as they walked toward the Gringotts doors. I've studied them. Hogwarts has 3 layers. The outer boundary, the perimeter wards, keyed to the grounds. The castle wards, structural, defensive, tied to the building itself. And the headmaster's wards, personal protections laid by each successive headmaster, which are the most recent layer and the most customizable. Harry ticked them off on his fingers. Dumbledore controls the third layer. He has significant influence over the second. But the first, the boundary wards, those are founder magic. Ancient. And responsive to founder blood. You believe you can override them. I believe the wards will recognize me. The Peverell ring has been resonating since I put it on, humming, pulling north. Toward Hogwarts. The castle knows I'm coming. They apparat to Hogsmeade, the village closest to the school, a cluster of quaint shops and pubs that served as the gateway to Hogwarts for generations of students. It was a bright morning in late July, the Scottish hills green and sun-warmed, the air sharp and clean after the perpetual underground chill of Gringotts. Amelia Bones was already at the school gates. She stood with 4 Aurors in full uniform, Kingsley Shacklebolt, a tall, calm man whose reputation for competence was matched only by his reputation for integrity, Nymphadora Tonks, young and bright-haired and practically vibrating with barely suppressed excitement, and 2 others whose names Harry didn't know but whose posture spoke of experience. Lord Potter, Amelia said. You're early. Punctuality is a goblin virtue. It rubs off. So I see. She held up a scroll. The warrant. Enforcement of the Wisengamot order dated October 14th. Return of all artifacts itemized in the Peverell Vault Manifest. Dumbledore has been served. Harry looked at the gates. Wrought iron, tall, flanked by stone pillars topped with winged boars. Beyond them, a long path wound through grounds that were almost absurdly beautiful, sweeping lawns, a dark forest to the left, a lake that glittered in the sun. And at the end of the path, on a rise of land that commanded views in every direction, the castle. Hogwarts. Harry had seen drawings. He'd read descriptions. The Potter grimoire contained an entire chapter on the school's construction, the magical theory behind it, the way the founders had woven their magic into the very stones. But nothing had prepared him for the reality. It was enormous. Towers and turrets and battlements and 100 windows that caught the light and threw it back in fragments. It was ancient and absurd and magnificent, and the magic radiating from it was so dense, so layered, so alive that Harry's senses staggered under the weight of it. And it was calling to him. The Peverell ring blazed with warmth. The castle's magic, the deep, foundational magic, the founder's magic, reached out through the wards and the stone and the earth and touched him, a greeting, a recognition, a wordless acknowledgement that the heir had come home. Harry pressed his hand to the gate. It swung open without resistance. Amelia raised an eyebrow. Those gates have been locked to unauthorized visitors for 1,000 years. I'm not unauthorized. Harry stepped through. The moment his foot touched Hogwarts ground, the sensation intensified, a wave of warmth rolling through him, magic humming in every stone and blade of grass, the castle reaching out with 1,000 invisible tendrils of awareness. He could feel the rooms. The corridors. The staircases that moved. The ghosts drifting through walls. The house elves bustling in the kitchens. The magical creatures in the forest. And in the headmaster's office, at the top of the tallest tower, a bright and complex magical signature that could only be Albus Dumbledore. He's waiting, Harry said. Let's not keep him. They walked up the path. The group drew stairs, the castle was not entirely empty in summer. A few staff members were visible in windows and doorways. Hagrid, the gamekeeper, was in his garden, and he stopped mid-motion with a watering can in one massive hand and his mouth open. A ghost, pearly white, Elizabethan rough, Harry recognized the description from his reading as nearly headless Nick, drifted through a wall, saw the procession, and reversed course immediately, presumably to spread the word. The entrance hall was vast, flagstone floors and vaulted ceilings and a marble staircase that rose into the upper floors. For enormous hourglasses on the wall, emerald, ruby, sapphire, gold, the house point counters, empty now at the start of summer. Harry paused. He could feel the castle's attention focused on him, a sentient awareness that was not quite consciousness but was more than mere enchantment. Hogwarts was alive in a way that no other building on Earth was alive, and it was interested in the boy standing in its entrance hall with Founder's blood in his veins and a Peverell ring on his finger. "This way," he said, and turned not toward the staircase but toward a stretch of blank wall to the left of the entrance. Amelia frowned. "The headmaster's office is upstairs." "I know. We're not going to the headmaster's office." He pressed his hand to the wall. The Peverell ring pulsed, and the stone rippled like water, and a door appeared, old oak, iron-banded, with the Hogwarts crest carved into its surface. It had not been there a moment ago. It had not been there for centuries. "What is that?" Amelia said. "The Founder's Chamber. Built by the 4 original Founders as a private meeting space. It exists outside the normal architecture of the castle, accessible only to those carrying Founder blood or Founder artifacts." Harry pushed the door open. "It's also the control room for the castle's core wards. The real ones. The ones that even the headmaster can't touch." Beyond the door was a circular room of white stone. 4 chairs arranged around a central table. 4 tapestries on the walls, lion, eagle, badger, serpent. And in the center of the table, a crystal sphere the size of a grapefruit, pulsing with multicolored light, red, blue, yellow, green, the 4 Founder colors swirling together in an endless dance. Harry walked to the table and placed his hand on the sphere. The castle shuddered. Not a physical tremor, nothing fell, nothing cracked, but a magical one, a realignment, a shift in the deep currents that flowed through Hogwarts' foundations. Every ward, every enchantment, every protective spell layered onto the castle over 1,000 years shivered and resettled, reorienting around a new focal point. Around Harry. He felt it happen. Felt the castle's magic flow into him and through him and back out again, a circuit completed, a connection established. He could feel every room now, every corridor, every hidden passage and secret chamber. He could feel the wards, all 3 layers, and he understood their structure the way you understood the layout of your own home. And he felt the headmaster's wards, Dumbledore's personal additions, the monitoring charms and control enchantments and subtle compulsions woven into the fabric of the school, and he understood them for what they were. Not protections. Controls. Dumbledore had spent decades modifying the castle's magic to serve his purposes, to watch, to track, to influence. The headmaster's office wasn't just an office. It was the nerve center of a surveillance system that covered every inch of the school. "Lord Potter." Amelia's voice was careful. "What just happened?" "Hogwarts recognized me as a Founder's heir. The castle's core wards have accepted my authority." Harry removed his hand from the sphere. His eyes were bright, not with the green glow of his magic but with something deeper, the reflected light of 1,000 years of accumulated enchantment. "I can see everything. The entire castle. Every ward, every spell, every modification made since the Founder's time." He paused. "Including where Dumbledore hid the artifacts. They found the locket first. It was in the Room of Hidden Things, a vast, cathedral-sized space on the 7th floor that the castle showed Harry the way to without hesitation, the corridors practically rearranging themselves to smooth his path. The room was packed floor to ceiling with centuries of accumulated junk, broken furniture, old textbooks, confiscated items, the detritus of 1,000 years of students hiding things they didn't want found. And in a locked cabinet near the back, nestled among cursed jewelry and dark artifacts that made Bogrod's ward-breaking senses twitch, the locket of Salazar Slytherin sat on a velvet cushion, pulsing with sickly green light. Harry felt at the moment they entered the room. A cold, oily pressure, like fingers pressing against the inside of his skull. The Horcrux was active, aware, in the limited way that soul fragments were aware, of the presence of someone who posed a threat. "Don't touch it," Harry said. "Bogrod, containment ward. Same type we used for the extraction." The ward breaker moved forward, hands already glowing with goblin magic. Within minutes, The locket was enclosed in a sphere of crystallized magical energy, smaller than the room's containment sphere but equally effective, the sole fragment inside thrashing silently against its prison. 1. Harry said. The cup was in Dumbledore's personal vault, not the Hogwarts vault, but a private chamber beneath the headmaster's office that was accessible only through a trapdoor hidden under the carpet. Harry found it through the castle's awareness, felt the layered protections around it, blood wards, intent wards, a Fidelius charm that should have made it unfindable but that the castle's own magic, responding to its heir, simply ignored. Amelia watched Harry walk to a specific spot on the headmaster's office floor, wave his hand, and cause the carpet to roll back, revealing a trapdoor that, according to every plan and blueprint of Hogwarts in existence, did not exist. He's been busy, Amelia said, looking down the ladder into the vault below. 4 decades. Harry descended. The vault was small, nothing like the Gringotts vaults, more like a cellar, but packed with objects that made his magical senses flare. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff was on a shelf, between a cracked ring that radiated dark magic and a worn leather journal that Harry's instincts told him to stay very far away from. The ring, he said, reaching out with his senses. That's another one. Another Horcrux. Amelia came down the ladder. Kingsley followed, his wand lit. The light caught the ring, a gold band with a cracked black stone, and Harry felt a jolt of recognition. Not from the Horcrux. From the stone. It was the same type of stone as the one in his Peverell ring. The same resonance. The same deep, old magic. That's a Peverell artifact, he said slowly. The ring. Underneath the Horcrux corruption. That's a family heirloom. How did Voldemort, the Gaunts? The Gaunt family descended from the Peverells, through the second brother, Cadmus. The ring would have passed down the Gaunt line. And Tom Riddle's mother was a Gaunt. Harry's jaw tightened. He turned his own family ring into a Horcrux. Bogrod contained both the cup and the ring. 3 Horcruxes secured. The journal went into a containment ward of its own. Harry wasn't certain it was a Horcrux, but his instinct said dangerous in a way that he'd learned to trust. And the diadem? Amelia asked, as they climbed back to the office. Back in the room of hidden things. I felt it when we were there, a second signature, separate from the locket, hidden deeper. I wanted to secure this vault first. Why? Because Dumbledore would have felt us entering his office. And I wanted him to come to me, not the other way around. As if on cue, the door to the headmaster's office opened. Albus Dumbledore stood in the doorway. He was wearing simple robes, dark blue, unadorned, a far cry from the star-spangled purple of the Wizengamot hearing. He looked older. Tired. The blue eyes were still sharp, still piercing, but the twinkle was gone, and in its place was something that Harry had not seen there before. Uncertainty. Harry, Dumbledore said. Professor Dumbledore. Dumbledore's gaze swept the room. The rolled-back carpet. The open trapdoor. Bogrod's containment wards glowing on the desk, the cup and ring visible inside their prisons. 4 Aurors. A goblin director. The head of the DMLE. And a boy standing in the middle of it all with 3 founders' houses on his hand and the authority of Hogwarts itself humming in the stones around him. You've been thorough, Dumbledore said. I learned from the goblins. Dumbledore stepped into the room. Kingsley shifted, wand ready. Tonks moved to cover the door. Amelia's hand was on her own wand, though she hadn't drawn it. I would like to explain, Dumbledore said. You've explained. In the Wizengamot. In your letters. Through your proxies. The explanations have been heard, recorded, and weighed. Harry's voice was level. We're past explanation, Professor. We're in enforcement. The Horcruxes are being contained and will be destroyed under DMLE supervision using goblin-forged weapons. Which is what should have happened from the beginning. You don't understand what you're dealing with. I understand exactly what I'm dealing with. I had one in my head for 10 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Dumbledore went pale, genuinely, visibly pale, the color draining from his face behind the silver beard. His eyes went to Harry's scar. "You knew," Harry said. "It wasn't a question." Dumbledore said nothing. "You knew there was a Horcrux in my scar. That's why you bound my core, not to protect the Muggles from accidental magic, but to keep the fragment dormant. To keep it from activating. To keep it contained." Dumbledore's silence was more damning than any confession. "And your plan," Harry continued, each word measured, precise, cutting, "was to leave it there. Wasn't it? Leave the fragment in my scar, raise me ignorant and grateful, steer me toward Voldemort when he returned, and let me die, because the Horcrux in my head could only be destroyed if I died. That was the sacrifice you were preparing me for. That was your greater good." Amelia Bones made a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a snarl. Kingsley's wand hand was trembling. Even Ragnarok, who had known most of this, looked at Dumbledore with something that transcended contempt. Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, the mask was gone. Not the warm grandfather. Not the wise leader. Not the calculated performer. Just an old man who had carried an impossible burden for too long and had made choices that he could no longer justify even to himself. "I believed it was the only way," he said. His voice was quiet. Raw. "The prophecy, I know about the prophecy. Neither can live while the other survives. Ragnarok obtained a copy from the Department of Mysteries 18 months ago. And I know what it means, or rather, what it actually means, as opposed to your interpretation." Harry took a step forward. His magic was visible now, a faint shimmer in the air around him, the castle's power resonating with his own, the combined weight of the Peverell line and the founder's legacy and 4 years of goblin training and his own raw, enormous, unbound potential. "The prophecy says one of us has to end it. It doesn't say I have to die. That was your addition. Your interpretation. Your plan. Because it was simpler, wasn't it? Simpler to raise a sacrifice than to find another way. Simpler to let a child die than to do the hard, messy, uncertain work of actually solving the problem. There was no other way to destroy the Horcrux, the goblins extracted it in 40 minutes. Dumbledore went still. Goblin soul magic. Ancient. Brutal. Effective. They pulled the fragment out of my scar and contained it, and I am standing here, alive, whole, and in possession of every piece of my own soul. It cost me pain. It did not cost me my life." Harry's eyes were blazing now, the green luminous, almost incandescent. "You didn't look for another way because you didn't want to find one. Because another way would have meant you weren't in control. Would have meant sharing information, asking for help, admitting that the great Albus Dumbledore couldn't solve every problem alone. And you couldn't do that. Your pride wouldn't let you. It was not pride, then what was it? Because I've read your history, Professor. I've read about Grindelwald. About Ariana. About your sister, who died because you and Gellert Grindelwald were too busy planning how to rule the world, for the greater good, to notice that a 14-year-old girl was caught in the crossfire. The blow landed. Harry saw it, saw the flinch, saw the old wound tear open behind Dumbledore's eyes. And he felt, briefly, something that was not quite sympathy but was adjacent to it. A recognition that the man standing in front of him was not a monster. Was not a villain twirling a mustache and cackling about power. He was a man who had been brilliant and ambitious and grievously wrong at a formative age, and who had spent the rest of his life trying to atone, not by changing, not by becoming humble, but by redirecting the same arrogance toward what he believed were better ends. He had gone from "I will rule for the greater good" to "I will manipulate for the greater good," and he had convinced himself that this represented growth. It didn't. "I'm sorry about your sister," Harry said. The anger didn't leave his voice, but something else entered it, a precision, a deliberateness, the recognition that this moment mattered and he needed to get it right. I'm sorry about the guilt you've carried. I'm sorry that the weight of all of it made you believe that you had to control everything, that only your judgment could be trusted, that the cost of being wrong was so catastrophic that you couldn't afford to let anyone else share the decision. Dumbledore was looking at him as though he'd never seen him before. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps until this moment, Harry had been an abstraction, a chess piece, a prophecy, a scar, a sacrifice, and the actual person had been invisible. But understanding why you did it doesn't make it acceptable, Harry said. You stole from me. You bound my magic. You sealed my parents' will. You imprisoned my godfather. You left me in a house where I was beaten and starved. You planned my death. And you did all of it alone, in secret, without accountability, because you believed, genuinely, sincerely believed, that you knew best. Harry shook his head. You didn't, Professor. And the cost of your certainty was paid by everyone except you. The room was silent. The torches flickered. The portraits on the walls, every previous headmaster, painted and enchanted, watching from their frames, were motionless, stunned into uncharacteristic stillness. Dumbledore sat down. Not in his headmaster's chair, in the smaller chair beside the desk, the one meant for visitors. He sat down like a man whose legs had simply stopped working. What would you have me do? He said, and for the first time, it was not a performance. It was a genuine question from a man who had run out of strategies. Resign as headmaster. Cooperate fully with the trial. Provide everything you know about Voldemort, the Horcruxes, the prophecy, his followers, his methods, to the DMLE and to me. Hold nothing back. Harry paused. And then let other people handle it. Not because you're incapable, but because capability without accountability is tyranny, and this world has had enough of that. And if I don't? If I believe, still, that my continued involvement, then I invoke the Founder's right. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. As heir to the houses of Peverell and Potter, direct descendants of 2 of the 4 founders, I have the legal and magical authority to remove any headmaster who has violated the terms of the Hogwarts Charter. The Charter requires the headmaster to act as steward, not sovereign. To protect the school and its students, not to use them as pawns. You have violated every principle the founders established when they built this school. Harry raised his hand. The Peverell ring blazed, and the castle responded, a deep, resonant vibration in the walls, the floors, the very air. The portraits rattled. The instruments on Dumbledore's desk spun wildly. Fawkes, on his perch, spread his wings and let out a long, clear note that was neither warning nor approval but acknowledgement. Hogwarts is mine by blood and right, Harry said. I don't want to rule it. I don't want to own it. But I will not allow it to be used as one man's chessboard. The Founder's right gives me the authority to remove you. I would prefer not to exercise it. I would prefer that you go voluntarily, with dignity, and spend whatever years you have left doing the one thing you've never tried. Which is trusting someone other than yourself. The silence stretched. The castle held its breath. Then Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of his age, the defeater of Grindelwald, the supreme mugwump, the man who had shaped the course of magical Britain for half a century, looked at the 11-year-old boy standing in front of him and said, "You are right." 2 words. Quiet. Unadorned. I will resign, Dumbledore said. I will cooperate with the trial and accept whatever judgment the Wizengamot renders. I will provide all information regarding Voldemort and his Horcruxes to Madame Bones and to you. He paused. And I will ask you, not as a condition, but as a request, to be careful. Tom Riddle was the most dangerous wizard I have ever encountered, and he is not finished. When he returns, Harry said, he will find that the world he left behind has changed. The Horcruxes will be destroyed. The political structures he relied on, the corruption, the fear, the willingness of good people to defer to authority rather than act, will be dismantled. And the boy he tried to kill will be waiting for him. Not as a sacrifice. As an opponent. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, long moment. And then, impossibly, he smiled. Not the practiced warmth of the public mask. Something smaller and sadder and more genuine. Your mother's eyes, he said. I always said that, and it was always inadequate. You have her eyes, Harry. But you have something she didn't, something none of us had. You have the clarity to see what power should be used for and the strength to refuse what it shouldn't. He stood. Removed his headmaster's ring, a simple gold band, Hogwarts crested, and placed it on the desk. The castle is yours, Lord Potter. Take better care of it than I did. He walked out of the office. No one stopped him. Fawkes watched him go. The Phoenix let out another note, softer this time, sadder, and then, in a burst of golden flame, vanished. Harry stood in the headmaster's office. The former headmaster's office. The portraits were whispering among themselves. The instruments were settling. The castle's magic, freed from decades of modification and control, was recalibrating, shedding Dumbledore's personal enchantments layer by layer, returning to something closer to what the founders had intended. The diadem, Harry said, because there was still work to do. Then we destroy them all. The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw was in the room of hidden things, as Harry had sensed, buried under a pile of broken vanishing cabinets and dusty robes. It pulsed with the same sickly darkness as the other Horcruxes, and Bogrod contained it with the efficiency of practice. 5 Horcruxes. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the ring, and the fragment extracted from Harry's scar. Plus the journal, which Harry's instincts had been right about, Bogrod confirmed it as a 6th Horcrux, the sole fragment bound into the pages of what appeared to be a school diary belonging to T.M. Riddle. 6 pieces of Tom Riddle's soul, lined up in containment spheres on a stone table in the founder's chamber. Is that all of them? Amelia asked. She looked shaken. The day had been a lot, even for a woman who dealt with dark magic professionally. The grimoire's theory on soul fragmentation suggests a limit based on magical numerology, Harry said. 7 is the most magically potent number. Voldemort would have aimed for 7 Horcruxes, 7 fragments, with the 7th being the piece still inside his body. 6 containers plus the original soul. 7 total. Yes. And with these 6 destroyed, Voldemort becomes mortal. Killable. When he comes back, and he will, he'll be diminished. Vulnerable. Still dangerous, but no longer unkillable. Harry looked at the containment spheres. The fragments thrashed inside them, 6 miniature hurricanes of dark magic raging against their prisons. He felt nothing for them. No sympathy. No horror. They were problems, and they were about to be solved. Director Ragnarok. The sword. Ragnarok produced a long case of goblin-forged steel. He opened it, and the sword of Godric Gryffindor caught the light of the founder's chamber and blazed like a star. It was beautiful. Harry had expected that, the descriptions in the grimoire were detailed and poetic. But seeing it was different from reading about it. 2.5 feet of goblin silver, rubies set in the hilt, the Gryffindor name engraved on the blade. Forged 1,000 years ago in the fires of the Goblin Nation's greatest smiths, enchanted by Godric Gryffindor himself, and imbued with the particular property of goblin-made objects, it absorbed that which made it stronger. Harry reached for the hilt. The sword hummed. The Peverell ring blazed. And something happened that no one in the room expected, the blade flared with emerald fire. Not the red gold of Gryffindor's colors. Green. The color of Harry's magic, the color of the killing curse that had marked him, the color of the Peverell line. The sword had accepted him. And it had changed for him. Well, Ragnarok said, staring at the green fire licking along the blade. That's new. Harry lifted the sword. It was lighter than it should have been, or rather, it felt light in his hand, balanced perfectly, as though it had been forged for him specifically. The magic in it resonated with his own, two currents merging, amplifying. He approached the first containment sphere. The locket. Inside, the soul fragment thrashed with increasing desperation, as if it could sense what was coming. "Any words?" Griphook asked. "Just one." Harry raised the sword. "Goodbye." He brought the blade down. The containment sphere shattered. The locket split in two. And the soul fragment, freed for an instant from its prison, screamed. Not silently this time. A real sound, a shriek of rage and agony and terror that echoed off the white stone walls and made every person in the room flinch. Black smoke poured from the broken locket, writhing, forming shapes, a face, Tom Riddle's face, young and handsome and twisted with fury, and then the goblin Silver's magic reached it, the absorbed enchantments and the Founder's power, and the smoke burned. Green fire consumed it. The face dissolved. The scream cut off. Silence. A scorch mark on the table. Two halves of a broken locket. Nothing else. "One down," Harry said. His hand was steady. 5 to go. He moved to the cup. Struck. Another scream, another writhing face, another burst of green fire. The cup cracked down the middle and the soul fragment within it died shrieking. The ring. The blade came down and the dark enchantment shattered, but the stone, the Peverell stone, remained intact, the Horcrux corruption burned away by the sword's magic, the original artifact preserved beneath it. Harry pocketed the ring. Reclamation. The diary. The sword pierced its cover and ink poured out like blood, black and viscous, and the pages screamed in a voice that was younger than the others, Tom Riddle at 16, preserved in paper, dying on a stone table in the room built by the people whose legacy he had defiled. The diadem. One clean strike. The tiara split and the soul fragment erupted and burned and was gone. And the extracted fragment, the one from Harry's scar, the marble-sized prison that had sat in a Gringotts vault for months. Harry held it in his palm for a moment. Felt the darkness inside it. Felt the thread that had once connected it to his mind, now severed, now meaningless. He set it on the table and brought the sword down for the last time. The shriek was the loudest yet. The face that formed in the smoke was not Voldemort's, it was a child's face, a boy's face, the face of Tom Riddle at 1 year old, the age he had been when he'd unknowingly created this fragment by trying to murder a baby. Harry watched it burn. He felt nothing. This fragment had lived in his head for 10 years, had influenced his dreams, had formed a bridge that a Dark Lord could have used to possess him. It had been the linchpin of Dumbledore's plan for his sacrifice. It had been the reason for the binding on his core, the tracking charms, the decade in a cupboard. It was gone now. They were all gone. Harry set the sword of Gryffindor on the table. The green fire dimmed and died, and the blade was just a blade again, beautiful, ancient, powerful, but quiet. 6 Horcruxes, he said. Destroyed. Amelia Bones sat down heavily in one of the Founder's chairs. Her face was grey. That was the most disturbing thing I have ever witnessed, and I was at the Battle of the 7 Ports. It's over. This part, at least. Harry looked at the destroyed artifacts, the locket in halves, the cup cracked, the diadem split, the diary soaked in its own ink. Only the ring remained whole, the Peverell stone glinting in the chamber's soft light. When Voldemort returns, and he will, his main soul fragment is still out there, bodiless, he'll be mortal. 1 life. 1 chance. No safety net. And when that day comes, I'll be ready. Harry turned to Ragnarok. The sword goes back to the Peverell vault. The destroyed artifacts go to the Department of Mysteries for study. The Peverell ring stays with me. And the school? Ragnarok asked. Harry looked around the Founder's chamber. 4 chairs. 4 tapestries. A crystal sphere pulsing with the steady, peaceful light of a castle that had been freed from decades of one man's control. The school needs a new headmaster. I'll recommend McGonagall to the Board of Governors. She's been here for decades, she's competent, and she's just been through the kind of disillusionment that makes people better leaders." He paused. "And she'll need to know everything. The Horcruxes. The prophecy. All of it. No more secrets. No more one-man crusades." The September 1st that followed was, in the estimation of everyone present at King's Cross Station, the most unusual start to a Hogwarts term in living memory. Platform 9 3/4 was crowded with the usual chaos of families and trunks and owls and last-minute reminders. First years clutched their parents' hands and stared at the scarlet Hogwarts Express with a mixture of excitement and terror that was as traditional as the train itself. Harry arrived without fanfare. He stepped through the barrier wearing simple robes, not the formal blacks of the Wisengamot hearing, just ordinary school robes, with the 3 house rings on his hand and the Potter grimoire in his trunk and the easy, balanced walk of someone who had spent 4 years training with goblins. People stared. Of course they stared. The last few months had made Harry Potter the most famous person in Wizarding Britain, more famous than he'd already been, which was saying something. The boy who lived. The boy who'd taken on Dumbledore. The Lord of 3 Houses. The Founder's heir. Harry ignored the stares. He found a compartment. He sat down. He opened the grimoire to a chapter on advanced ward theory and began to read. The compartment door opened 5 minutes later. "Mind if I sit?" Neville said. He was holding a toad in one hand and dragging a trunk with the other, and he looked simultaneously nervous and delighted and about 100 times more confident than the boy Harry had met outside the Wisengamot elevator a year ago. "That seat's yours," Harry said. Neville grinned and dropped into the seat across from him. The toad, Trevor, introduced with the slightly embarrassed air of someone who knew that toads were not particularly impressive but loved his anyway, was deposited on the seat beside him. "New wand?" Harry asked, nodding at the holster visible on Neville's hip. "Cherry and unicorn hair. 13 inches. Mr. Ollivander said it was ideal for herbological magic." Neville drew it and turned it in his hand, and the warmth in his expression, the simple, uncomplicated pleasure of holding something that was his, that worked for him, that didn't fight him every time he tried to cast, made Harry's chest tighten with something that he would have called happiness if he'd been more practiced at identifying it. "How's it feel?" "Like everything just works. Like magic is actually supposed to be fun." Neville paused. Gran cried when Ollivander matched it. She pretended she had something in her eye, but she cried. "Good." The train pulled out of the station. London slid past the windows, giving way to suburbs, then countryside. Green fields under a September sky. The compartment door opened again. A girl with bushy brown hair and an air of determined competence stuck her head in. "Have either of you seen a toad?" "A boy named, oh." She spotted Trevor. "There he is." "Well. I was also going to introduce myself. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all about you, Lord Potter, and I have approximately 40 questions, but I understand if now isn't a good time." Harry looked at Hermione Granger and saw something he recognized: hunger. Not for food, for knowledge, for understanding, for the feeling of the world making sense. The same hunger that had driven him through 4 years of the Potter grimoire and the Gringotts archives and every book the goblins would let him touch. "Sit down," he said. "And it's Harry. Are you sure? I don't want to be presumptuous." "Hermione. Sit." She sat. And within 5 minutes, she was examining the Potter grimoire with an expression of such naked intellectual avarice that Neville started laughing and couldn't stop. The hours passed. Other students came and went, some curious, some nervous, some transparently trying to align themselves with the most powerful first year in Hogwarts history. Harry was polite to all of them and warm to none of them, because warmth was earned, not given, and he had learned the difference the hard way. One visitor stood out. The compartment door opened without a knock, and a boy with pale blonde hair and a pointed face flanked by two larger boys whose primary function appeared to be taking up space stepped inside. "So it's true," the blonde boy said. "Harry Potter. On the train." He looked at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be superior and not quite managing it. "I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." Neville made a small, derisive sound. Draco's eyes cut to him. "Think my name's funny, do you? I know who you are. Longbottom." "My father says, I know what your father says," Harry said, not looking up from his book. "I also know what your father does. He bribes Wizengamot members, hoards dark artifacts, and spent the last war serving Voldemort while claiming to be under the Imperius curse." Now he looked up. "You might want to choose a different opening line." Draco went pink. "My father is welcome to file a complaint with my solicitors. All 12 firms." "Was there something else?" Draco stared at him. The two large boys shifted uncomfortably. Hermione was watching with the fascinated attention of someone observing a nature documentary. Neville had his hand on his new wand and was trying very hard not to smile. "You'll find out that some families are better than others, Potter," Draco said, recovering with an effort. "I can help you there." "Draco." Harry closed his book. "I am Lord of the House of Potter, the House of Black, which makes me head of your family's overlord house, by the way, and the House of Peverell. I hold 3 Wizengamot seats. I just removed Albus Dumbledore from the headmastership. I destroyed 6 Horcruxes before lunch. I don't need help determining which families are better than others. I need you to stop blocking the door." Draco opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Found nothing useful to say. Turned on his heel and left, his bookends following. "That," Hermione said, "was the most efficient social demolition I have ever witnessed." "He'll be back," Harry said. "The Malfoys always come back. They're like a rash." Neville lost his battle with the smile and dissolved into laughter. After a moment, Hermione joined him. And Harry, sitting in a train compartment with his first real friends, heading toward a castle that recognized him as its heir, carrying 3 lordships and a grimoire and the quiet knowledge that the darkest wizard in history was now mortal, allowed himself to laugh too. Hogwarts at night was something out of a dream. The castle blazed with light against the dark Scottish sky, its windows golden, its towers silhouetted against stars that were brighter and more numerous than anything visible from London. The first years crossed the lake in small boats, tradition, unbreakable, and Harry sat in the prow of his and watched the castle approach and felt the wards reach out to greet him like an old friend. The boats docked. They climbed the stairs. Professor McGonagall, newly appointed headmistress, stern and Scottish and barely concealing a tremor of emotion that Harry suspected had very little to do with nervousness and a great deal to do with the weight of the hat she was now wearing, met them in the entrance hall. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said, and her eyes found Harry for a moment, and something passed between them that needed no words. The sorting hat was placed on a stool. The great hall was full, for long tables, hundreds of students, a staff table at the far end where McGonagall's empty chair waited beside a conspicuously absent Dumbledore. Snape was there, black-robed, black-haired, watching Harry with an expression of such complicated, layered hostility that it practically needed its own index. Harry felt the man's gaze and filed it away. Snape was a problem for another day. Names were called. Students were sorted. And then, Potter, Harry. The great hall went silent. Every head turned. Every eye fixed on the thin boy who walked to the stool with the easy stride of someone who had walked into harder rooms than this. The hat settled on his head. "Well, well, well," said a voice in his mind. Not Voldemort, he knew what that felt like, and it was gone. This was the sorting hat, ancient and amused. Harry Potter. Or should I say Lord Potter-Black-Peverell? Or perhaps Founder's heir. You have a lot of names for someone so young. Just Harry is fine. Just Harry. With a magical core the size of a small star and goblin combat training and 3 Wizengamot seats and the lingering resonance of 6 destroyed Horcruxes. Just Harry. You're funny. Where are you putting me? That is the question, isn't it? The Hat's voice grew thoughtful. You have courage, Gryffindor would claim you in a heartbeat. You have ambition, Slytherin would kill for you. You have intellect, Ravenclaw would frame your admission letter. You have loyalty, Hufflepuff would adopt you on the spot. I know what I am. I want to know where I belong. A long pause. You belong to the castle, Harry Potter. You belong to all 4 houses. But since I can only put you in one, the Hat considered. You chose to face Dumbledore in the Wizengamot when you could have settled quietly. You chose to walk into Hogwarts and confront him when you could have sent others. You chose to destroy the Horcruxes yourself when you could have let the goblins handle it. Every choice, every time, the brave one. Not the smart one or the strategic one or the loyal one, though they were often all of those as well. The brave one. Mum and Dad were Gryffindors. They were. But that's not why. The Hat's voice rang through the great hall. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry removed the hat, set it on the stool, and walked to his table. Neville was already there, sorted minutes earlier, into Gryffindor, looking stunned and proud and like he might actually float out of his chair. Harry sat beside him. Across the hall, at the Ravenclaw table where she'd been sorted, Hermione caught his eye and raised her pumpkin juice in a toast. The feast appeared. Mountains of food, golden plates, goblets that filled themselves. Harry ate, properly, without the furtive speed of a boy accustomed to having his meals interrupted, and listened to the chatter and the laughter and the noise of 400 young witches and wizards who had no idea how close their world had come to being shaped by one man's unchecked certainty. After the feast, as the students filed toward their dormitories, Harry lingered. He stood in the entrance hall as the crowd thinned and placed his hand on the stone wall. The castle hummed. Warm. Welcoming. Alive. And then he felt it. A wrongness. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A magical signature that didn't belong, dark, parasitic, familiar. Not a Horcrux. The Horcruxes were destroyed. But something adjacent. Something connected. 3rd floor. Right-hand corridor. Harry closed his eyes and reached deeper into the castle's awareness. The 3rd floor corridor was warded, recently, clumsily, by someone who didn't understand the castle's magic well enough to integrate the protections properly. Behind the wards, a series of chambers. Traps. Puzzles. And at the end of them, something small and bright and valuable that was being guarded with a level of paranoia that suggested its protector was terrified of losing it. And wrapped around that bright, valuable thing, attached to it like a leech, was a dark presence. Not a soul fragment. Something worse. Something conscious. A wraith. A shade. The bodiless remnant of a wizard who had been ripped from his body by a rebounding curse and had spent 10 years clinging to existence through the sheer malevolent force of his will. Voldemort was in the castle. Not as a memory. Not as a fragment. As himself, diminished, parasitic, possessing something or someone, feeding on the magical object that had been hidden on the 3rd floor. Harry opened his eyes. He was 11 years old. He had 3 lordships and a grimoire and 4 years of training and a castle that recognized him as its master. He had destroyed 6 Horcruxes. He had faced Dumbledore and won. He had been forged in darkness and sharpened by goblins, and he was not, and would never be, the ignorant, grateful sacrifice that anyone had planned for him to be. And Tom Riddle was in his school. Harry pushed off the wall. His magic hummed. The castle's magic rose to meet it, a partnership, an alliance, 1,000 years of protective enchantment aligning with the will of its heir. He walked toward the stairs. His footsteps echoed in the empty entrance hall. I told you I'd be ready, he thought, and the castle, humming around him, agreed.